I'm having is I almost need to start things, and then as it gets mechanized, like have protections away from not the I'm down to like go into the boredom of it, but of the like we no longer care who's there. We're
care that the job's getting done.
Yeah.
Yeah, super brutal. Super brutal.
Which you need to build anything.
Yeah, jobs need to get done. Things need to get automated. You need that to be able to scale 100%, but it's hard to, I don't want to say degrade people to processes, but that's kind of what it ends up being. Well,
the interesting thing is most people thrive in process. That's what I've been realizing. I'm like, if they don't have that, they're screwed.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I'm taking my chaos mindset and applying it to them.
Yeah.
And they're actually like, just tell me what to do and tell me how you want it done, and I'm super happy to be a part of it. Like,
I don't want to know the big picture.
No, they're like, I'm playing down here, and they're like, that's too much stress. Just tell me how to.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Anyways, I guess we're rolling, so we'll start it off. So, like I said, we'll give you a little intro before, so people already know who you are, and they'll get a great little gold nugget right there. Little snippet. I love podcasts, man. I love podcasts because there's so much gold in them. But the thing I don't love about podcasts is always like so much fat a lot of the time. Like you got to go on that 2x speed sometimes, right? Like the guest will sit down. It was great. I mean, we already met up, so it's all good. You know, I feel like we're homies. Oh my God. Usually someone just comes in and sits down and we just have a conversation.
Yo, who are you, man?
I don't know. I'm like, you know,
I don't know. Let's figure this out.
And we just stumble through together or whatever. But there's always so much fat on it. You know, like you come in, hi Julian, how are you? And they'll be like, oh, I'm good. And then you go back on some little small talk for 10 minutes and you're like, oh, like, did I really get anything out of this? You know? And it's like, even that question, like, how are you is like, how are you is the now, right? Like, and the now, when I look at it, is for you. Like the now is for you. Like I want to know about the past and I want to know about the future, because I feel like, hey, we can learn something from the past and we can look forward to the future, and that's where value is, right? So I think if podcasts can operate in that space a little bit more and get a little bit away from the BS, although there's some podcasts that are great and they're all BS and they're entertainment value, different lane, right? But I mean, like some of them are just like, oh man, you just hear a host or like three people go back and forth on like some event that just happened in the room 2 minutes before, or like the, hey, how are you, man? I don't know. I just kind of bugs me. I try to cut the fat. You know what I mean?
Just bullshitting and filling space.
Which is cool. I don't know. I'm
okay to call it, man. Sometimes I think we need a little bit more of the substance.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anyways, after all, I'll say all that. Julian, how are you?
Yeah, life's been a trip, man. Just got back from a 2-day adventure that turned into a 3-day adventure. And booked a ticket to Bali to go do something I've never thought about doing before, or just take like a prolonged, like month-long period and just figure out who I am and what I am, and just like fully reset and just have space away from everything in my life to like no friends, no anything, and just day after day go into re-understanding everything I thought I was, just to really get to a point on like a foundational level of like, yo, is this still where I want to be at? And kind of going into the next 10 years of my life, like, is the trajectory still making sense?
So that doesn't make any sense to me, because you say trying to figure out who I am and what I am and rediscover. But in a sense, like you're 30.
Yeah.
So you've had probably over a decade of building relationships, building companies, building friends, building careers, building knowledge bases. What the hell do you mean rediscover who I am? You seem like a person that definitely knows who they are.
Yeah, I think that was the really interesting part of like coming to this process is it's so easy to get caught up in everything that I'm comfortable with and everything that I know and just say, yeah, that's who I am, you know? And I think a lot of us do that, and there's a lot of good that comes in it. But I think to be super grounded in that space, you almost have to stress test it and check your own bullshit and just be like, cool, like, are those people in my life the people that I wanted in my life? Are the ways I'm spending my days the ways I actually want to be spending them? Are my thought processes what I want them to be? Are my relationships where they want them to be? And then also the space to just kind of let go of everything I'm in right now and say, what else could it be?
Right. So that's the result of it. That's the result of the stress tests. How do you stress test?
I think just asking a lot of questions, like having the space to, one, look at where you're at and like write down, like, what do I think my days are normally like when I'm back home?
Right.
What do I want the days to be? And just have the space away from the days. Like, I think that's why I'm taking such a prolonged period of time to step back and do that.
You're taking 30 days?
Between 30 and 45. Big.
It's a lot of time.
It's big, man.
Damn.
But I think that's the crazy thing. Like, everyone's like, how do you do that? And I'm like, what's 45 days in the scheme of life? 45 for like the most, in my opinion, the most important decisions I'll make. And I think there's like, I have a level of honesty with myself that I'm confident going out there and doing that.
Right.
Where I always go back to like when I'm 10 years down the road, do I want to be in a position that I bullshitted myself to get into? Or am I want to be in a position that when I was 30, I looked at it critically and said, yo, I ended up like actually going here because I made a decision 10 years ago to get there. And I think all of us could do that more often, more frequently, like just that constant check-in of like where we're at. Does it still make sense? Because especially started to notice like 20 to 30 went quick.
Right.
But like 29 to 30, like it just went so much faster than 20 to 21. And I'm realizing that for me, like life just seems to be speeding up more and more.
It's fractal.
It's crazy.
It's fractal, right? I mean, it's if you're a 1-year-old, that year is 1 of 1, right? If you're a 29-year-old, that year from 29 to 30 is 1 of 30, right? Yeah. So it's just simply fractal. It's just how our brain compartmentalizes time, right? It's just, that's how our experience of life seems to be. I really try to, I really used to try to slow that down. I think like when I was maybe 18, I had a summer where I was working at a resort back on Hornby, and I was just like, I was getting scared of how quick time was going. Like time was going really quick. Oh shit, that was a day. That was 3 hours.
It gets you every once in a while.
And you're like, oh shit. Like remember when an hour was a long time, and your mom was like, oh, like mom, like can I have dinner? And she was like, oh, it'll be ready in an hour. And you're like, fuck, like an hour. That's so long. I'm so hungry now. An hour is like that, right? Yeah. It's nothing. 10 minutes is like that. And so I was like, oh, I gotta slow this down somehow. So I was like, okay, if I just sleep as little as possible, I'll gain that time back. And then if I would just work as much as possible, because when you're going through like something that's uncomfortable, time slows down, right? If you're going to something that's comfortable, then time goes quickly. So like, I'll just make myself as uncomfortable as possible in order to accentuate time, which is like kind of a cool theory in a way. You get more experiences out of life, but I don't think it works in the long term. I just kind of find a way to kind of flow with it and really be present in the moment. Back to that earlier point. But yeah, I love that approach. Now, I want to go back to the stress test thing real quick, because I think that's really, really valuable. Like you said, you stress test yourself by putting yourself in you ask certain questions to yourself, you put yourself in certain states of mind. How do you put yourself in those states of mind? What activities, what tangible things are you doing to get yourself there where you actually are stress testing yourself? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. One of the big things is getting myself out of like the flow of the day-to-day that you're used to. Right. You know, like when you think about most of your day, it's just habitual.
Totally.
You wake up and the autopilot thing kicks in and you go. And when you're in that world, it ends up consuming you, and you start to you have this tendency to believe that world is all there is, you know? Right. And so like the biggest thing that I always try and do is like pull myself outside of the situation. So I'm no longer stuck in that kind of vortex of energy. At which point I can take a step back and be like, cool, like what is that? You know, and it's one of the best mechanisms I have for that is I ask somebody that knows me closely but is not involved in that.
Oh, not involved in your daily process.
Just be like, okay, what's actually going on? You know?
As in, what do you see going on in my daily routine?
Yeah.
How are you observing this?
Because I'll sit there and I'll be like, I'm super emotionally caught up in this thing. I'm stressed about this. I feel like I'm putting all this weight into this stuff. And they're completely outside. They're not emotionally invested. They might not know the nuances, but they can sit there and they can tell me a whole different story, which is a whole different perspective. Yeah. And the more perspectives like that I can get about my own life, the better, and the more I can change the story that I'm living in. Ooh. Right? Because you can have one event happen to 4 different people and have 4 different realities happen.
Super valid.
Right. And so for me, it's how do I get as good as possible with myself to understand what those stories are, to use those narratives throughout my life to just make my life feel better and better.
Yeah, totally.
Right. You can have a ton of struggle.
Yeah.
And you can have that and you're like, this sucks, or you're like, this is the greatest challenge and game I've ever played. Let's have fun with this. Same situation in reality, two totally different mental outcomes.
Totally. Ray Dalio. Yeah.
Principles.
Principles.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
Of course you have. It's on my audiobook right now.
Guy's legend.
The guy's crazy. Similar principle. It's fresh in my mind because I just went through it, and essentially where he says you're crossing a jungle, and it's just like, well, you're at point A. You can either you're at point A, which is not bad, like it's decent. And if you want to, get to the top of that mountain and get that gem, it's going to be a long, hard path through this valley in this jungle. What's going to increase your odds of getting to that level of success or greatness or achievement or happiness or whatever it may be, and living an extraordinary life. And he says, well, you have to cross this jungle, and that jungle has so many unknowns in it. And so what's the best way for you to do that? Well, the best way for you to do that is to get 4 other people that can all see a different jungle within that jungle, because you'll go through and you won't see that monkey coming from the side of you, or you won't see that root, but the guy behind you or the guy beside you might, right? Because they're looking at it through their reality. And in your reality, that root doesn't exist. It does in the physical reality, but in your perception of it, it's not existing. But you're seeing someone else's perception of that actual physical reality, which then it brings it into your consciousness. If your ego is dissolved and you're allowed to listen to that other person that is a radical free thinker, and that root becomes reality, all of a sudden you don't trip on it. All of a sudden you get to the other side and get that gem, right? Very similar to what you're talking about, I think.
Oh, no, exactly, right? And how do I cut as many of the bad stories out of my brain as I can and get to what's actually true in my life, so that when I'm looking back on it, I just look back and I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted it to be.
The bad stories.
Yeah.
The bad realities, the bad perceptions.
Yeah, the ones that are making me suffer unnecessarily, or the ones that are false to the reality that exists.
Right. The lies you're telling yourself.
Yeah, and I try and get away from the word lies, just because it's in that space, it feels real. But you realize it's just a story that I'm caught up in.
In your life, it's a truth.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it's not happening consciously, it's happening below that. But to realize how much power I have in that space, to just step out of that story, shift the story 1 to the right, and look at it totally differently.
Shift the story 1 to the right.
It's like one of those kaleidoscope things you had when you were like 9 or 10 years old. You just click it and it just, the Zoom masters.
Nice. I love it. I miss those things. Those things were dope. That's hilarious. Yeah, totally. I could not agree more, but just getting to that spot is super difficult. Getting to that spot where you're like, oh, maybe I am lying to myself. Like most people, sorry, not lying. Maybe I'm creating a false reality for myself through whatever psychological mechanisms I use in my brain to survive, right? But just getting, like, some people never ever get to that spot. Some people die without ever finding that, how did you get to that spot in your mental space where you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am full of shit, or maybe I don't have it right. That's a really hard spot to get to. How'd you get there?
Yeah, I don't, going back, I think it keeps going back to this point of a desire for self-awareness, a desire to probably not want to give up my own power. I think that's one theme that I've noticed a lot in my life, is looking around and you realize how often we give up control and power to our own situations, where you hear people and they're like, I want to go do this thing, but I can't because of insert reason.
Right.
And you realize that in that, they've just given up the power and put all of their control to an outside force, as opposed to saying, I'm not going to go travel for a year because I care about my relationships, my friends, and my career, and I prioritize those over the year of freedom that I'd have traveling. Wow, that's a much different sentence than I can't go travel because I have a job, right? And you just start to realize how often we're trained to give up power and control through our languaging. And so I think seeing that, especially early on, when I was 18, 19, 20, I just started to get really curious where I was doing that and wanting to understand where I was giving up my own, and then try and figure out ways that I could create a story that was actually a lot more compelling for myself and a lot more from a state that I choose
to be in,
to engage in it, rather than I'm helpless and I can't control it. you know, and you always see those people that go through like immense struggles and they stay above kind of like the baseline and they're still engaged and they're still in control and they're emotionally still available. And you're like, how do those guys do that? How do those girls do that? How do they go through those spaces through stuff that I, at most points in my life, can't imagine? And they're just still rolling through, you know, and it's been a really deep curiosity to try and answer the question for like myself of like, what's a good life? And I think a lot of the times we think that a good life is an easy life, which from my experience and understanding, I don't believe. You know, I think the struggles of life are what make the rewards of life good. But then that begs the question of like, what do you do when shit inevitably hits the fan? Because it's going to hit the fan.
Yeah,
you know, anyone that goes through life thinking it's not is ignorant to the realities of most of our lives, all the way down to the fact of like, what are you going to do when you're on the deathbed? You know? And so, yeah, this last probably like 5 years of my life has just been a pretty deep dive into like what those stories are, how I create the narratives for myself that make the most sense, and that keep me engaged and keep me on a track that I still want to show up to everything I want to show up to every day.
And choosing what that is. Yeah, totally. It's really funny that you word it that way, because like that's the premise of self-hired essentially, is like taking ownership, giving yourself permission. Like just saying, oh no, like that's not actually in your hands. Like in reality, it's actually in mine, and I can do whatever I wish with that. Like my girlfriend or my boyfriend or my job or my education isn't necessarily imposing barriers on me. I in turn have the handles on those walls. I can just push them down if I want to, right? Which is very, very interesting. Which is what you've tried, from my understanding, from just being a fan, what you've tried to do with Chasing Sunrise, and how you've crafted and built that over the years is, maybe I'm wrong, but just essentially giving humans a path to permission. Am I wrong in saying that? Giving humans a path to saying, hey, you know what? I can actually push these walls down. I can actually go on a trip here. I can wake up at 4 a.m. I can, being the primary, you know, source word there. Maybe?
Yeah, I think like on like a ground floor level, it's totally it, man. Like, that's one thing. Like I have a background in both marketing and then a lot in human psychology, and just kind of watching those two worlds go back and forth and like looking at the landscape of the world now, like everything is designed to convince everybody of our own opinion. You know, like even when you look at like Twitter, it's like you're putting your opinion out there for the most part. You look at all the advertising, you go through Instagram, and it's everybody taking their opinion and trying to put it on the world, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like they're just putting it out there. Yeah. But very rarely do we create these spaces to be like, cool, like what actually do you need? You know, like Nike's going to come to you, and they're going to try and sell you their shoes, and they're going to try and convince you why their shoes are the best and why you need them. But nobody's really asking, hey man, do you need shoes? You know, it's a foundational question. You got 25 pairs of shoes. Yeah. You don't need 26 for the most part. Yeah. You know, and really getting to that core of like, what does somebody need in their life to thrive, to be fulfilled, to be engaged, to want to show up. And that answer is different for every single person, you know, and that's been a lot of my whole thing, where I'm trying to answer that question for myself. And I realize how, one, difficult it is to get to those answers, two, how fluid those answers are throughout the year. Right. Like the answers for me when I was 20 are nowhere close to what they are when I'm 30. Right. And to realize that like the mechanism to get to those answers is self-reflection and self-awareness. And also the space from somebody else to ask those questions, and then the space held to answer them.
Okay, so hold on. I don't mean to cut you off, but you just connected some dots for me here, and I want to reflect on a little bit. So you said Nike doesn't come up to us and say, do you need a pair of shoes? They say, here's a pair of shoes, buy them, right? Yeah. That's totally the premise for, I mean, that's what you learn in marketing essentially, is like, how do you sell a pen? Classic question. Well, hey, can you write something down for me? You create the need, right? And that's the whole thing, is like, well, by creating the need, you then create the lever to pull on that need, and the lever to pull on that permission. Because now I'm not asking, I don't necessarily have the power to say yes, or yes, I do need it, or no, I don't need it, which and then again gives me this space. You talk about creating space. I'm now imposed to being like, oh, you know what? He just told me that I need to write something down. So now I need a pen. Like it's a shift in reality. And I guess that's essentially the whole goal of marketing, is to create another reality in space in a consumer's mind. Sorry, just a sidebar, but I think that is valid. So sorry, you're creating space, giving people the opportunity to go and get away from that. And doing that through group excursions. Yes.
Yeah, it's really like when you look at like the question I'm really fascinated by, and this is a very simple version of it, is like, what makes a good life? You know,
right?
Because I think when you go around a room of 100 people and you ask the simple question of like, hey, who wants to live a good life? You'll get an overwhelming majority, if not every single hand.
100%. Yeah.
You know, and when you actually start to like answer that question, it gets really complex really quickly in the actual things that add those up. But it's really simple when you actually just look at the big buckets. It's like most people want connection, like genuine humans around them that they're actually engaged with. And we know on a scientific biological level that like that connection is really, really important for a human to thrive.
Right.
Humans need growth. You know, most of us are wired on some level to continue to push our own versions of our own self, our own identity, to become better versions of ourselves. And you start to like look at all these different buckets that add up what a fulfilled and engaged humans are. And then you start to look around and you're like, well, how do we create spaces for people to come together and have access to that stuff?
You said a bucket is growth and a bucket is connection.
Yeah.
What else is there another bucket you'd add there?
There's a bunch. Like,
of course there's a bunch.
Big one, and so this is where it starts to get a little murky on the corners in the sense of like,
I don't mean to compartmentalize you, but
yeah, so some of them like they differ for different people at different points in their life, right, and that's so like career and the ability to provide is another one. Spirituality / religion
I see what
is
you're
another
saying.
one. But the actual fundamental needs that a human needs to feel fulfilled have been studied for a long period of time.
Right.
Been known for hundreds, if not thousands of years in certain ways. And it's really about like bringing that back to somebody in 2019 and say like, what are those things and how do we as a society create the spaces for somebody to have access to that? Right. And so Chasing Sunrise in its current iteration is really focused on the human experience side and the human connection side.
Right.
So how do we create spaces for people to come together and meet each other
in
a way that feels genuine and conducive to people getting to know each other? And how do people have the opportunity to experience different aspects of life? Some they might like, some they might not like, but in the quest of figuring out the stuff that lights them up.
So that's what you have right here, is getting that feeling back. So for those that are just listening on audio, we're at the homepage right now of Chasing Sunrise. Get that feeling back of focusing on what you care about, period, first, period, before the noise. That's really interesting. So that whole premise you just essentially described is captured within that nice, beautiful landing page. By the way, goddamn, whoever that web designer is, shout out to them.
That'd be Gordon. So Gordon's my business partner on it. Roommate, lived together for 6 years now, worked on the company together for 3.
Wow.
Which in itself has been like a microcosm of learning a lot about human connection, human relationships, energy, how people basically coexist and thrive together in a space that's super tight and connected.
Yeah.
And realizing those spaces where sometimes you do need more space apart. Sometimes you do need a lot more space together. But the amount of growth that both of us have gone through because you've had other people there, in a lot of ways, constantly calling you out on the bullshit you're hiding from yourself, you know? And you realize just like that part, at least for me, from my experience, is so deeply ingrained in what it means to be human.
And have a good life.
Yeah, that you can't run away from it, you know?
Fuck yeah, totally. So that's I kind of have an understanding of where it is today. What was the original thought? Like, what was the first light bulb? What did that light bulb look like when it comes to Chasing Sunrise?
Yeah, so Chasing Sunrise was like this really interesting space where like it started because my roommate and I were getting into that monotonous routine where you come home and you're not disengaged, you know, like life's still good. Like the on paper life was awesome, you know, like he was doing quite well in his company. I had my own company. living downtown. I was 26 or 27 at the time. He was 29. You just like life
Things
on
are
paper
good.
life on paper was awesome.
Yeah.
Life inside and that like feeling of coming home, and you just slowly start to feel the disengagement come up, and you're like, is this it? You know, like, is this life? And my internal gut was like, I sure as hell hope not.
So what were you doing at that exact time?
So I had like a digital agency that I
you
was
had started?
working. Yeah, that I had started, was running, was working with a bunch of clients, doing some cool projects, running a small startup outside of that was closely related to it.
Very cool.
And it was like all the stuff, like if you would have sat me down in a bar, like I got to shoot the shit with it. And like, it's the story you could tell.
Yeah, totally.
But I know internally, I'm like, this isn't the story that I want, you know? And that goes back to like what I'm planning on going to do into Bali is like on the outside, everyone would have just, you know, applauded the situation I'm in, but I would go home and I'm like, that's not the situation I want, you know? And my whole relationship with myself is like, I don't care if you actually think that what I'm doing is good. I want to believe it, you know? Because if I get to the end of my life and I don't believe it, the only person I've bullshitted is myself. And for me, I believe I owe it to myself to have that level of honesty. I love to push other people to that level of honesty because I think we can convince ourselves really quickly that we're doing the right things when, you know, a couple of really tough questions answered honestly will show we're not.
Dude, and society will reinforce that, man. Like,
oh, absolutely.
It's like so brutal. And I don't want to go on a tangent here, but it's just like I'm in a situation right now where, like you said, on papers, it's great. And people that know, hey, listen, man, you're doing really well. That's awesome. You're like doing this, doing that. There's all the things you want to do. Like, shout out to you. And you're like, yeah, it is. And there should be a moment of gratitude there. And I not to say that I'm not grateful, but it's like I'm literally in the process right now. Like, I'll go home and I'll open literally this notebook, and I'll be like, I'm trying to map out, okay, so this is what my life is right now. These pillars, this is happening right here. These are the relationships I have. And then I try to like just throw that out and be like, okay, if we just started from scratch and we're at this point with the tools and the knowledge that I have today, what would I build? You know, in terms of life experience, like not on like an hour to hour basis, but like on like a generalistic, okay, well, like, I want this level of connection here in this avenue. I want this level of growth in this avenue, and then start to build around that. And that, like, that's a project I've been trying to do for forever, and I can't fill it out because there's so much. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And but you get society, like, essentially the bar is set so low. That's what I mean to say. Like, the bar is really set low. We're so polite in a sense where it's just like, and I get into like weird conversations all the time. Like, okay, so I'm going to school. Okay, well, what are you going to school for? And that's like, well, I'm going to get my Bachelor of Commerce. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And like, well, I want to go into business. Okay, what do you want to do? Well, I want to go into marketing. Okay, well, what do you want to do? And that's where the conversation ends. Well, it's like, well, fuck, I didn't think that far. And so you could go through that path and get down to, you know, getting that degree or whatever it may be. And I don't mean to paint degrees in a bad light.
It's one avenue.
It's one avenue.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I'm just saying, well, you're engineering it straight way. Why don't you reverse engineer it? Which I think is exactly what you've done by asking that simple question of like, okay, what's a good human experience? Let's go from there. Yeah. Like, that's fucking beautiful. And a lot of the time the answer, like, I can't even craft that answer right now. And like, I try to think of myself as insightful. And like I said, like similar processes that you do, where you're like, okay, let's just strip everything down, look at what it is, where like call bullshit on yourself. And I still can't get to the bottom of that. Right. And that's like, I don't know how to get there, but I'm trying. And I think a lot of listeners of this podcast are at a similar spot. They're at the why spot. The spot where like you've gone through and, you know, you've maybe become comfortable or you found something that works for you, and you start to really dissect those patterns and those channels, and you're like, fuck, why? You know? And that's a hard question for me. I don't know how to answer it.
I think that's the cool thing. Like, I think we're so trained to need the answer to that question before we can even give ourselves permission to start.
Right.
And that just reminded me of like a funny thing going back to CS. Like, there was no why. Like, right. there was a feeling, there was we want to have fun with this, but there wasn't this like grandiose, like, yeah, this is what it's got to be. And still to this day, like, I don't know what the tenure is, you know, and like everybody else wants to know.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in like, what can I learn right now in the real moments?
That's one of my questions for you.
Yeah,
It's
like
what the 10 years.
What are
Anyways.
those things? What are those things that like bubble up? Because this, like the version of the organization that we're creating today, I didn't know 90% of that stuff existed when we started.
Right.
You know, and like we had like a rough idea of like we wanted to create a space that enabled people to go do fun stuff. You know, we wanted people to, like my thing was I wanted people to feel engaged with life. But what that looked like and the roadblocks and the things that come up and the struggles and all that stuff was all hidden behind this big curtain that I would have never, ever even understood existed had I not been willing to like step out and walk down and play with it, screw up a whole bunch, you know? And like, I think that's the sign of like anybody who's engaged with their own lives is they're willing to kind of play with those spaces long before they have it mapped out. And for me, it always comes back to curiosities. You know, like I don't think I can fake the energy to go chase things that I don't actually care about for 30, 40 years, like the amount of time it takes to build a career. But I do know that the things that I'm curious about elicit a whole ton of energy in me. And so I'm always just kind of scanning my radar to be like, what are the books that I read that I'm like, ooh, that was really good? What are the podcasts that I listen to that I'm like, oh, that one was good. I want to listen to that again.
Right.
And slowly have started to build this map of like, here's the stuff in life that Julian cares about. And here's the stuff in life that, while maybe important, I just don't, you know, like, and in a world that is as big as the world we're living in, I think you need that like mental discipline to understand those two. Otherwise, you end up getting caught trying to be everything, which means you end up being nothing.
Yeah, that's huge. So what are some of those things that you think are definitely important, but just don't light a fire in you?
Yeah, there's so much. Like there's a whole bunch in the space of like politics, you know, like where it's just like, to be an engaged citizen, I should be paying attention to some of that stuff.
And you want to be an engaged citizen.
And I want to be,
yes.
You know? And I'm like, but I just don't have the space, nor do I have the drive, nor do I have the belief that understanding that whole world is going to make any impact on any part of that world.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
That's another one. Like understanding what's going on potentially with technology is another one that I'm like, I should probably know what's happening in the future. And I'm like, but it's not a space that I'm actually really engaged in, you know? Yeah. And the ability to just let go of that and say, that's a world that's going to go on and I don't need to be there. In a lot of ways, like some stuff about like growing up and having your whole life together in a way that's presented properly, you know, like having a house, having kids, having a family. For me, I'm like, it's not clicking those buckets for me right now. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to put that over there.
Yeah.
And not even going to worry about them. I'll go focus on the stuff that I'm really curious and engaged in right now. And the cool part is that like none of this is forever. You know, right. At any point
that could change.
I can go step back over there and get super engrossed in politics, and hell, if I want to become a politician, step over and become one. You know, like, and I think that's when I talk about like giving ourselves permission and control, like you can bounce back and forth, but I struggled a lot early on, probably wanting to like take on too much, you know, and I see that all the time. Like we're a burnt out generation. You know, everyone's trying to do 100% of everything.
Yeah.
To people that are like idolizing people that build multiple companies simultaneously, you know, like, I don't know. The thought of that to me is nuts.
I don't know how it's possible. And
the hard part is you have like the one or two people that have done it. You know, you hear about like the Steve Jobs or you hear about the Jack Dorseys and you're like, that guy did it, therefore I should do it. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's probably not a really good plan. And that's not to say like, don't stress test that. Like, yeah. But like, I think we need that like critical eye to ourselves to figure out what those pieces are and block out what it is for us in this moment.
Totally. This is slightly off topic, but
this is my favorite.
When I say blockers, what comes to mind?
My own bullshit. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of it is just like we live in a world where you have more access to more things right now than ever before in history. You know, like all the pieces are there. The costs are getting driven down. The truth is, most of the reason why we're not doing something we want to is because we have our own kind of bullshit in the way,
All right.
you know, and that might not be 100% of the time, but it's probably a large majority. And so like knowing that, it's like, if we can pull some of that bullshit back, what can we create?
Right.
And you look at today, which is living in a world where like there's a lot of things that are either polarized or emotionally charged.
Yeah, very much so.
And not in a good way. There's a lot of things that are emotionally charged because we're fighting for a more balanced and diverse and open world, which is really
great.
Phenomenal. It's amazing to see the progress that's happened. And then on the other side, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's emotionally charged that's just noise.
Right.
You know, and you're seeing these worlds where it's like the trolls of the internet are creating a whole bunch of noise, which then actually is influencing the way we look at how we live our lives. You know,
Yeah,
and then
totally.
so we take that on and we're like, this one time somebody said I shouldn't do this on the internet, and I don't even know who they were. And it was just, and then we take that on and we're like, maybe I won't go publish that blog. Maybe I won't go create a podcast. You know,
Totally.
Like, if you read the YouTube comments, the odds are you're probably never going to start a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Because it's hell. It's scary. You know,
comments are a scary place.
So yeah, when it comes to blockers, like a lot of the times, for me, it's like it all comes back to my own stuff. Like what are the thoughts? What are the narratives? What story am I telling myself about what I am doing or what I'm not doing? And does that align with what I want to do with my life?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm trying to digest that a little bit. Yeah. So you were 26. You had a roommate. You had an idea. You executed on that idea. Your initial idea was, let's take groups of strangers.
It was just
Anybody.
Like we would throw out ideas of things we wanted to do.
Yes.
And we're like, yo, if you want to show up, here's where we're meeting. This is what you need.
Very cool.
Nothing more. Super simple.
Very cool. Very cool. I want to get into that and actually the inner workings of that, because I find it super interesting. Because I'm a really practical guy, so I'm like, okay, so in order to do that, I need this, 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 and this, right? And we'll get there. But I want to go a little bit more towards, so what came first, 21 Damn Early Days or Chasing Sunrise?
So the process of Damn Early Days came first.
Yes.
And it wasn't anything like, so back to, we were 27 and my roommate and I, like I'd come home from work, he'd come home from work, and we just have these conversations just about life and what was going on and where each other at. And that question of like, is this it? Just kind of came up, and it was probably like 2 weeks in to having these conversations. And I was just like, I don't know what to do, but I do know that if I continue to do this, I don't see a radical inflection in how I'm feeling. You know, like I don't see how continuing to do the same thing is all of a sudden going to change where I'm at and how I feel about it. And I just kind of slowly saw the energy and drive and kind of spark inside me just
Dwindle.
And it was never drastic. Like I think that's, if you would have taken me in that moment and me a year ago, you would have been like, whoa, that's huge.
Right.
But like life creeps in relatively, you know, and it's slowly, and before you know it, you're like, how the hell am I here?
Yeah.
And so with no real idea of what to do, we just committed to getting up for a month straight at 4:30 in the morning. And
so your idea or his idea? Not that it matters.
I read a blog about it. Some guy threw up a TED talk about it, about how he did it. And then you just kind of hear a whole bunch of successful people do it. And for me, I'm a night owl. Like I'm up 12, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And it was just that whole thing where I'm like, it's the opposite end on the spectrum of what I'm doing right now.
Nice.
You know, and I think that's such a powerful thing, is like, if life's going one way and you're in one space, what's the exact opposite? And just play with it, you know? And I think we all owe it to all the major kind of pockets of life to give them a serious run to see what works, you know? I don't think we can, like, you can't fight against veganism until you've given veganism a serious run.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
You know, like, go eat, if you don't want to go down that road, go eat meat for a whole bunch of time.
Yeah.
Go be a vegetarian for a bunch of time.
Yeah.
Go be a vegan for a bunch of time.
Yeah.
Cut your bullshit. And now you have like an actual sample size
Look
to play
at it.
from,
Yeah.
you know? And so I think we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to all the other things to actually give those things that exist a serious run. And so for me, it was just like 4:30 in the morning is the exact opposite of what I'm doing right now. Like,
let's do it.
Let's do it. Worst case scenario, I'm tired for a month. I'm an asshole. You know, best case scenario, who knows?
And what's a month? You can do anything for a month.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's no problem. I love that. Love that concept. There's a lot of things you just said there. Every sentence you're saying, I'm fucking have an idea around. But so I'll jump on two. The first one is you owe it to those sections of life to like give them a run.
Yeah.
And like when you talk about how do I live a fulfilled life, that's kind of how in my mind. And I don't know that, I'm just spewing words, but like that sounds really right to me. Like, how do you fully fulfill life? Well, there's a bunch of shit out there. Go try it. Like, there's a bunch of buckets. Go fill them with your time and experience, and maybe you'll get something out of it, or maybe you won't, but at least you would have tried. The second thought that comes out of my mind is, and we've talked about this earlier, is going to the opposite end of your spectrum. I think is really, really powerful because we have natural biases, right? Like you're an A-type personality and you want to go towards these certain things that you feel are right or correct and fit into that archetype, right? And then just having the humility and the openness and the curiosity to be like, all right, let's go exact opposite of the spectrum and go do that, right? I find it really hard to do that. Very, very valuable. And I totally understand it. But it's just hard to do. Like, it's just simply really fucking hard to do. Like getting up at 1 o'clock, or sorry, going to sleep at 1 o'clock versus getting up at 4:30. That's really hard to do. When you had those moments of like, you know, maybe your second day of getting up at 4:30, like that, I know you had a thought in your head, like, man, what the fuck is this? You know, like you had to, like, why push past that? Why? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so a couple things, like first one, the more you tell yourself it's hard to do, the harder it is to do. Because the truth is, there is somebody out there that gets up at 3:30 in the morning every single day of his life effortlessly. Yeah. You know, so it's like, okay, what's going on there? Like, why am I struggling like hell with this?
Yes.
And they find it super easy.
Yeah.
You know, so I think like when I find something like that where I'm struggling, where it's just a pure pain, I always like to start with like, what's my approach? You know, like why? And so I struggled getting up at 4:30 in the morning.
Of course.
And the narrative in my head was, this sucks.
Yeah.
You know?
The narrative in most people's head.
Every day I'm getting up and I'm like, this sucks. And I'm like, of course I don't want to get out of bed to something that sucks. You know, and the second I kind of changed that to like, how damn lucky am I to like be able to get up and have 2.5 hours of free time to do whatever the hell I want, which is the thing we're begging for.
At 5 o'clock.
At 5 o'clock, you know, like, or like 3 o'clock when you're at work, you're like, I would just love some free time to do what I want. And you're like, here it is, man.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like that bullshit narrative that I really like to get into. I'm like, I gave myself the space to have it.
Yeah.
And then I told myself it sucks and I'm not taking, you know, like, I'm like, okay.
Yes.
There's something there.
Yes.
Because the truth is, like, when you pull away all the emotion out of it, all it is setting an alarm, going to bed at the right time, and waking up.
Getting up.
You know? And I love that space because I think emotions are insanely powerful, but I think pulling yourself out of emotions is just as powerful sometimes. Where like you can go there and you're like, if I was going to write a computer program to do this, how easy would it be?
Yeah.
And it's like that would happen every single day if that was a computer program.
Yeah, no, totally would.
And so I really like to like play in those spaces.
Fuck, that's so powerful. That's so powerful.
And then find other people who are doing what I want to do or what I want to play with easily. So like I struggled like with this a ton with diet. Yeah. You know, like 5 years ago, I could never understood how people ate plant-based. I'm like, what do you eat? You know, like how do you make this food? How does it taste good? And so I started hanging out with a bunch of people who ate either plant-based or predominantly plant-based or full vegan. Yeah. And you just see how they cook dinner. And like, it was effortless for them, you know? And I'm sitting there and like, how do you make dinner every night? Yeah. And for them, it was ingrained into how they were. And they're like, I'm going to go home to the store and I'll just grab these 4 or 5 things and I'll make it.
And I'm good.
And I just kind of had dinner with them a few times and you're like, it's actually really easy to eat like that. Yeah. You know, like I had a bunch of emotional BS in my head that was like, oh, I got to go to the store. That's a lot of work. I don't know what I'm cooking. It's probably not going to taste very good.
So I have to like, Google it and that takes more time. Yeah. I don't want to do that. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like you get a glimpse into that world and you're like, okay, my approach is wrong. My story's wrong. And the second you pull yourself out of that, you're like, no, it's really simple. It's a bunch of simple tasks.
Fuck, that's so well put. I've been trying to find a way to put that. Like, if you really break things, so I take a first principles approach. Elon, I think it's in his book. I don't know. Where it's just like, okay, why are rockets expensive? Rockets are expensive because they come from a bunch of different manufacturers, and they all have profit margins. So if we take that out, right, it's my God, why am I forgetting the name? Everything underneath the same roof. God damn. Vertical integration.
Vertical integration.
God damn. Come on, Josh. Words. It's just a simple thing of like, okay, this costs too much. Let's get to the root of why this costs too much, and let's take that cost out. Simple, right? Now, so I just take that approach and go to like fitness, for instance. Like, how hard is going for a run? Going for a run requires you to change your shorts or change your pants and lace up your shoes and just go. One foot in front of the other. It doesn't take an app, it doesn't take music, it doesn't take anything, right? Just go. That's all it is. So just that simple, like there's the thought of going, and then there's going, and then there's a whole lot in between that too, right? So it's just like taking that emotional, egotistical, whatever it is, whatever that fluff is in between those 2 point A and point B, and just saying, all right, see ya, like we're gone, you're done, like I'm not going to deal with you and going. So a lot of the time when I was playing basketball very seriously on a high level, I was like, okay, so if I have an idea, so like, you know, maybe I'll be at practice and I'm like, oh, I'm going to stay after practice, and then as soon as you have that idea, all of a sudden all the bullshit starts coming, right? So I was like, no, listen, you have to discipline yourself to, as soon as you get that idea, it's already at execution. Yeah, idea, execution. There's nothing in between. Yeah. Don't put anything in between. Don't allow yourself to give yourself the space to think about the in between. And so that's kind of the narrative I developed to be able to go for runs or hit the gym or whatever it may be. I fail to communicate that to other people or get people to take a similar approach, or just, I don't care what the approach is. I care about you lacing your shoes up and going, right? So getting a way to communicate that is extremely difficult to me, to people that are not people like yourselves. Like, again, from a coaching perspective, I work really well with A types. We're terrible with fucking C types. Really trying to figure that out, right? How do you change your communication style, or how you're giving someone motivation or information to motivate a C or a B or whatever freaking type you are, that's not just go, you know? Like, I'll talk to a C type personality and yeah, Josh, like, you're pushing against me, not from behind, you know? So I don't know how to communicate those yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you're like, I think it's interesting, man, because I think there's so much in communication.
Fuck, it's so hard.
Well, it's really simple.
I know.
It's, you know, like, it's actually really simple. Like, communication is, I say something, you understand it, and can communicate it back to me. That's all communication is, you know? But what's awkward is we don't sit in those, like, spaces where I'm like, hey, how do you want to be communicated to? You know, like, just a really simple question where it's like, and you can see this in, like, love languages in relationships, which are phenomenal, you know?
Yes.
Like, how do you receive the fact that I care about you? You know, and if you need a ton of quality time and all I'm doing is buying you gifts, guess what? We're not communicating.
So wait, hold up. So that's a fucking amazing example. So break down love language for us. There's physical, there's gifting, there's, I don't know.
So there's physical touch, gifting, words of affirmation, quality time.
And one other. There's 5. I know there's 5. It's okay.
It'll come up. Acts of service.
Acts of service.
That's the one I should have known. That's my big one. Yeah, like when somebody does something for me, I'm like, they care about me.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't do a lot for somebody
unless you cared about them.
Unless I cared about them. You know, and so I'm going around the world projecting that bias onto everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and so like that was a huge thing for me. Like I would do a ton for people in a relationship, and they'd be like, but you don't spend time with me. You don't care about me.
That's what I want.
And I'm like, I care a ton about you. Look at all this stuff I did. I swept your, you know, like.
Yes.
And that's a big thing for me, is like getting really comfortable in the space of trying to understand how somebody wants to and needs to be communicated to, so that they both hear what I'm communicating to them and then also feel comfortable enough to communicate back to me. You know, and I think with the people around us, like, we owe it to the depth of the relationship that we want and the connection we want to spend time figuring that stuff out with people. You know, like we all say we want human connection. And then the question comes up, cool, how much are you investing in actually getting human connection?
Yeah.
In actually connecting with people around you? Because we live in a world where it's easier than ever to connect with people. Yeah. The truth is, it is, you know, like you have access to thousands of people at your fingertips.
Yes.
The next step requires you to likely step out of a place you're comfortable with and do real work in the real world.
Yeah. On a relationship level, that's so prevalent. I was listening to another podcast about relationships, and it was one of the pieces of advice in order to get that connection and get that feedback loop. They talked about it as a feedback loop in terms of, I'm communicating something to you. Do you feel comfortable enough to communicate something back to me? Was one of their pieces of advice was just sit your partner down, no phones, no facial expressions, no anything. Just look each other in the eye. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Like, that is so hard. Like, that is literally impossible. Can you do it for a minute? Can you do it for 2 minutes? What are you getting? No facial expressions, no means of communications or anything. Just simple, bam, you're here, I'm here. And try to communicate on that level. That just trying to kickstart a feedback loop, right? Getting that feedback loop is so tough. And then also having I think the second part to that equation is having the humility to say, oh shit, maybe I don't know how you want to be communicated to, right? And try to get to the bottom of that, because like a lot of the times I'll just assume, oh, like I have one way of communicating that's worked great with these 10 people, and why isn't it working with you? Is there something wrong with you? Probably not. There's probably something wrong with me. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, and even the onus back to like, do I know how I want to be communicated to?
Oh, fuck.
You know, like, I think it's easy to immediately go to like, how do I want to be communicated to? You know, like one of my most biggest things is, for the first 25 years of my life, I like to be communicated to through letters. You know, because going with my personality, like I would be, if I was in a conversation, I'd be quick to fill space and I'd be quick to respond. So one of the things that would end up happening is I would never actually hear what the other person was saying.
You were just waiting to talk.
I was just waiting to talk, you know? And so I had realized that if you sent me a letter, I could actually read it and digest it, and there was nobody to talk to. And that kind of preceded the ability to like actually sit and listen.
Yes.
And so that was like just a really interesting thing for me, where I'm like, okay, like if this matters to you, like put it in a letter and I'll read it. And that allowed me to actually digest what somebody was actually trying to say. And like, I'll caveat that probably with like a little bit of like guilt on the side of like, yeah, it probably gave me more space to be able to respond in a way that I wanted to,
right.
Like maybe mount a defense rather than having the space to be like, to hold like myself in a vulnerable space where I'm like, yeah, I fucked up, you know?
Yeah.
But it was just interesting when I put that together, and I'm like, okay, like I haven't just as much onus in any relationship that I'm in with somebody to know how I need to be communicated to.
Fuck.
And communicate that to them. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm not holding my end of the bargain.
Dude, you totally just connected a couple more dots for me, man. There's a point in my development of conversation that happened where, okay, I would rather a letter. I totally would have rathered a letter for a long time. And even just sitting down and doing these podcasts, like that ability to be able to hold space and create space, like, oh, it's okay that there's a blank spot here or whatever. And that's when like I sit here with a page full of notes on like shit I want to touch on and stuff like that. And there was a point when we started, like, dude, I would make sure I hit every one of these, and that I'd constantly reference back to like bing, 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 done, 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 right? And then there was a spot, because I felt like I never wanted that blank space, and I always wanted to be armed with a response, or even listening to someone, right? Like if I listen to you talk, there's part of me that's digesting what you're saying, and then taking a string off of that and saying, okay, this is my rebuttal, and then being armed with that rebuttal. But if something if you said didn't connect with me, and I had nothing to arm myself as a response to it, all of a sudden I go into this frenzy, and I'm not fucking listening to you, dude. Yeah. Like I'm not listening to you. I'm trying to think in my head while kind of listening to what you're saying, so I can keep track a little bit, but I'm really just having this internal narrative so I can have a rebuttal, while versus all this value you're spewing out, you know, like is just getting lost. And that's when, so all the first, like, I don't know the first how many podcasts, but I always would have to listen to them again, because I'm like, fuck, I was there, but I didn't really listen.
I didn't hear half of what he was saying.
I didn't hear it. And then I'll hear the recording, and I'll be like, holy shit. And let me play that back. You know, it took like, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, just to like get to that spot of like, oh shit, like I'm not holding space. I'm not even listening. Like, fucking listen. You know, and that's not even just on a podcast front, but on every conversation front. And then you start to notice the little tendencies of people. Like, people don't like pauses. People hate that shit.
We're awkward, man. We're
So
so awkward.
So if someone says something and you're necessarily just kind of taking it in, they're like, oh fuck, like what did I do wrong? Like what did I say? Oh my God, what's he thinking? How is he digesting that? Did I say the right thing? And they go into this spew. And it's actually, have you read 48 Laws of Power?
Yeah, Robert Greene.
Fuck. What haven't you read, dude? God damn.
If anyone hasn't figured it out, like books are the secret to life.
Totally.
You know, and reading books, but then implementing books.
100. Okay, 100%.
There's been 108 billion people that have lived on the planet. We're that last 8 billion. Yet we live our lives like we're figuring out life for the first time.
Fuck, yeah.
You know, you get 100 billion people that have done this before, and we're like, it's 2019, what do they know? You know, like the truth is we've been chasing the same stuff for a long time.
Fulfillment.
Yeah.
Human experience.
Yeah.
These things are not new.
Same stuff, different like facade on top of it. But at the end of the day, like humans want the same thing.
Yeah. No, totally. That's so freaking true. And that's why. So some of the criticisms of that book is like, yeah, but they're referencing like shit from like the 1400s. Like it's not really prevalent. It's not really, you know, current. Well, it's like, well, do humans still have like defense mechanisms? Do people still like play power games? Like all this shit is the same in a sense, right? But to that point, like I became so much more armed when I realized that space is okay. You know, like it's the same thing like, in a relationship, it's the same thing in fitness. Like in a relationship, it's like, okay, it's cool. You go do your thing. Like I'm 100% cool with you going to do your thing. In fitness, like I used to not be okay with like taking rests.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing. You're creating space in a conversation. You're creating space. What you just said, giving yourself permission, you create fucking space. We just had Nick Lowe on the podcast last week, and he's a physiotherapist. His whole thing is creating space, both in your mind and both in your joints and your muscles. Yeah. I don't know. It's just a weird overlying theme that just seems to be coming. And you're saying you're taking this trip to Bali, fucking creating space.
Yeah. That's
all. I never, ever, ever realized that before. Very interesting. Connecting dots. That's cool. I'm thinking in real time. I apologize.
Oh, dude, I love it, man. I think it's...
Go ahead.
Oh, it's just cool. Like when you think about... Like I think that was a narrative that I fell into so hard, like on the self-hired theme, on the entrepreneurship theme, like on the go, like downtime was the devil.
Yes.
Stopping was the devil, you know, like, and it was just this, and like, I'll be honest, like part of this taking space is because I'm torched inside.
Yeah.
You know, like I've bled myself dry for 10 years to try and build something. And you're just like, shit, man, there's got to be a better way, you know? And that's been the last like 2.5 to 3 years has been like realizing and watching other people who have done phenomenally good things in a way that I'm like, how do they go home at 5 p.m. and go have dinner with their wife? You know? And I'm like, but they're building these big things. And like, I think we have a not very healthy mentality around entrepreneurship, and you see it in like the hustle mentality, where it's just this like go, 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 go. And I think it's like there's a nuanced narrative there. Like entrepreneurship is work. There's no way that you will build anything without working, and working probably significantly harder than the average person.
Yes.
But to completely not hold respect for what happens when you take time off actually shoots yourself in the foot, you know? And I think this is like one of my fascinations with like science and neuroscience. Like we actually know that the brain works harder now when it's not actively loaded than it does when it's actively loaded.
All right.
Therefore, taking time off will allow you to connect things that you couldn't connect when you're actively engaged, which is where the whole old adage of like shower thoughts come up.
Yes.
Because what your brain's doing in the back end is it's playing around with all these seemingly outrageous things that you've had throughout your day, trying to connect them to see if it can make sense. Most of it goes bing, nope, bing, nope. Every once in a while, it's like, whoa, these two seemingly disparate ideas actually make sense connected. And they push them into your conscious mind, and you're like, why didn't I see that before?
Right.
You know, and that's the one thing, like, as I get older, I'm like, that time to slow down and like that time to like actually go play or rest or relax or put myself in new environments that don't seem like they have anything to do with what I'm currently doing, while it doesn't look productive on like the getting shit done side.
Right.
It's actually way more productive than I could ever imagine.
Because you have more brain power in a sense.
And life is just better. You know, like I think that's the crazy thing where there's a phenomenally good book by Matthew Walker, who's one of the top sleep doctors in the world.
That's where I was going to go.
Everybody's got to read it. I think they should teach this stuff in kindergarten, and then again in grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and every single year past that. But humans are the only animals that we've found that starve themselves of sleep.
Yes.
You know? And we also know that sleep is the most vital function for human existence, and that losing even an hour of sleep is detrimental one time.
Yes.
You know, like a lot of the times you get like, I'll sleep 6 hours here and 6 hours here, 6 hours here, and then Saturday I'll sleep for 10 hours. And you're like,
it doesn't work like that.
It just doesn't work like that, you know? And we now have the overwhelming body of information that says that.
Yes.
And I think that's been like one of my biggest struggles is like moving from like this more roller coaster boom and bust lifestyle to like, how do I just like always sit at like 80%?
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, but I got more in the tank.
Oh, man.
But that like 20% is where the magic happens when I need to go into that.
It's the same thing with working out.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with working out. I always, one more set. Can you do another rep? Then do another rep. Yeah. But it's not about that.
And that narrative's sexy, man. Like it feels
sexy.
good.
Yeah.
You know, and it looks good, and they applaud you for it.
And it pumps your ego too.
And it's cool to have that tool. Like that's what I'm starting to realize. Like that's a tool that I want to be able to have. You know, like I want to be in 5th gear and be able to dig to 6th when it's there. But I don't want to have a narrative in my head that says I always have to be in 6th or I'm not good enough.
Right. So let me bounce this off you right now. It's like I run, right? Sometimes, couple days a week, and I'll be like, okay, I know I'm capable of running like a half marathon, right? Like that's generally kind of where I max out. That's as far as I've gone. I'll be honest, right? As far as I've gone. Now every time I lace up, I'm like, yo, let's go 21K. And through running and that meditative state, I've kind of been like, okay, so, but again, let's not push. Let's push to like 50% of that, right? Let's do 10. Let's do 6 constantly. And then the way I kind of get over that hurdle of like, fuck, I really want to push to that 21. Like I really want to put, like I just have that kind of like, I hate going up short. I hate wasted potential. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I go out for a run, I only run 8K or like I only run 10K. Well, that's 11K of potential I've just left. Yeah. And I feel terrible about that, right? So the way I'm trying to trick my mind, I'm still in the process of this, is like, okay, once a month, like let's push it. Let's try to break down the barriers and let's overtrain and just like get to that mental space. But the rest of the time, let's chill and trying to give myself permission that way. I don't know if that's a good way psychologically to approach it though, because then maybe I'm training myself getting too comfortable in that 8K. Do you know what I'm saying?
Totally.
I don't know how to get past that.
I think that's the confusing part of the world is like, I can very quickly find examples of people that are doing one side of that and being successful and people doing the other side of that and being successful. God damn it.
There's not one answer?
You know, there isn't one answer.
Oh, come on.
And I think things definitely can change when you're like, I want to be the absolute best in the world. Like when you look at like the best ultra runner in the world, those guys are insane. Mm-hmm. You know, they're like, I'm going to go for a run. Cool. I'm going to run 100 miles, you know, and
Cam Hanes or
and
whatever.
It is that like almost crazy mindset.
Yeah.
And so I think the rules change depending on where you're at and what you want. But for most of us, in most of the pursuits that we're going for, we're not actually pushing to be that, you know? And so I think that's where like the self-awareness comes in, where like, you know, in yourself, what the right answer is, you know? And I think that's such a dangerous game because in that you give yourself the tool to talk yourself out of things that you probably should do. You know, like it's 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, I should go to the gym. And I'm like, I'm going to create a really compelling, strong narrative that it's better for me to stay in bed and sleep.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes 100% it is. Other times, totally not. But I think if we're like still enough with ourselves and we have practiced that narrative enough, like, you know, when you're full of shit.
Yes.
You know, and I always go back to the person I'll be like a month or a year or 10 years down. And I'm like, who does he want me to be in this moment? And that for me is like the quickest way to cut through all of the stories and all of the emotions while still holding the nuances. You know, like it's easy from somebody from the outside to be like, dude, get up. And I'm like, no, like I actually do need to sleep here.
Yes.
And that going to like the future version of myself is the quickest way to hold and honor like the nuances of my life.
Yes. With
the realities of what I want and cut them against the stories.
So you create a coach in your mind that is yourself 10 years down the line that you've crafted that is then imposing those standards or whatever it may be on your current self. Yeah. That's fucking cool. You know what that is though? That's like the snooze button. Like between that 5 minutes, like this is where I go in my mind. between 4:30 when you said you're gonna get up for damn early days, and all of a sudden you hit that snooze button, but you're kind of awake, you're kind of conscious, right? Because that alarm did go off, you've been snapped out of your deep sleep. That 5 minutes is just 5 minutes of space for you to create false narratives.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's essentially, okay, if I have I just need another 5 minutes, so I can just kind of like think about this, and then think about, oh shit, well, I only did get like 7 hours of sleep last night, I should get another sleep, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, logically at this I should just sleep.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, and then you agree with yourself, you're like, yeah, good job, brain, good night.
Good night, I'm done.
Yeah, it's so funny, man. Dude, I have a lot of internal thoughts around parenthood. I'm 22, so I'm nowhere even close to that. But I always feel like I'm preparing for that, right? And I didn't necessarily have a great upbringing or great parents. I mean, they tried, don't get me wrong, it's just a bad situation. And I always think about my philosophies around that, and what a crazy world. If I bring someone into this world in 10 years, what it's going to look like and all this shit. Dude, like, what are your thoughts around that? Are you thinking about that at all? I mean, you're 30. I don't know. Technically, shit, you should maybe have a kid. I don't know, by society's standard. Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I think it's always in the back of everybody's mind. Like whether they want
Right.
to or whether they don't. Like it's there. It's wired in us. I have a couple really interesting thoughts. Like one of them, like when people are like, "Oh my God, the world, like it's going to hell." Like the truth is, we live in the most abundant, most peaceful, highest quality of life world that has ever existed on almost every metric of human quality of life.
Yes.
So when people, like, I think it's so easy to get caught up in the insanity of today, but the truth is like the world we live in now is just one of the best worlds to be born into.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to like kind of really quickly look at the landscape, and we're wired to find the negative in it, and we're wired to find the insanity in it, and just be like, I don't want to bring my kids into that. Like who doesn't want to bring their kids into a world that is becoming accepting of any type of human there is?
Yeah.
That's cool. Who doesn't want to bring their kids into a world that has no major wars
or just medically advanced?
Yeah, who's going to solve all the human suffering medically in the next 100 years? And so I think like getting into that, like, and that's a problem that I have, is like I always look at the world and I'm like, is this thing going to hell? Like, and you look around, like you look at climate change, you look at all these subjects, and you're like, my brain, like the monkey part of my brain, wants to latch onto, oh my God, we're screwed. Mm-hmm. It's over. Mm-hmm. But when you kind of step over, and it's like, the truth is we could be going into one of the best times ever to be a human. Mm-hmm. And so I think we all owe it to ourselves and to each other to like spend some space looking at the reality in there, because it calms you down a lot. And for me, like I get back into a space where I'm like, whoa, we can play with this. Like, this is fun. Yeah. And then looking at the kids, like I deeply believe that parenting is the most valuable job we have on our planet. Yeah. And I don't see an alignment with that with society, in the sense that I don't think there's enough resources for parents out there. I don't think there's enough information that teaches parents how to parent. Right. And like I say that not being a parent myself, so there's that caveat, but having spent a lot of time talking to parents and talking and watching people parent and watching people go through the process of becoming parents, and you realize like those years for children are just so important. Oh my God. And asking a societal question of like, how do we make sure that the people having children are phenomenally prepared to raise children? Right. We have more time learning about mathematics than we do about the functioning working of a child, and like, and I could go on in examples of that, but it just is crazy. Yeah. But I think a lot of really good parenting comes with owning your own shit first. And I think somebody who has gone through and done the work is in a much better place to raise a child. Yes. And so that's a lot of my philosophy for myself. It's like, what stuff do I got to go through to the point where I feel maybe not ready? I don't know if you ever feel ready to have a child. Of course, yeah. Talk to a lot of people that are like, no, you just kind of throw yourself in there. Yeah. But a place where I'm grounded enough in who I am, because I don't want to have a child and then not raise the child. Right. From an energetic perspective. Mm-hmm. Like I want that to be like where I place more energy than anything I've ever done in my life. Totally. Which makes total logical sense, right? Yeah, no,
people know more about mathematics than they know about raising a child. Yeah, totally. And dealing with your own shit. Like, so it's not necessarily like, I don't think you can ever be ready for change in any facet of anything. I mean, it's change. That's the whole point of it. You're not supposed to be ready for it. You can't be ready for it. That's just like, that's fundamental in the physics of change, right? But it's just like kind of being like, okay, I want to have the tools. I just want to have the tools to be able to like endure that turbulence. And then also not, so part of like dealing with my own shit, I always feel is like, well, you know, I need to get over all of my preconceived notions and BS that I have created for myself and both life has thrown at me. Like I need to just get past that to a point of like, I don't want to call it like spiritual awakening, but like understanding that on some level. And then the other thing is like, then there's like the practical questions around that. Like, for instance, like, my brother's 42, very well off. He's done great for himself. He's a partner at a tech firm. You know, he's great. He's a great guy, and he has amazing kids. And he looks around and sees a lot of similar people in his situation where they've worked really hard for what they've gotten. Now their kids are gifted. Like they've done all the right things. They put them in the right schools, give them the great nutrition, all that stuff, like good society and all that, good neighborhoods, and like put the formula together. But these kids have no ingenuity and no grit. And you're like, well, fuck, how do I add that to the equation, right? So like a lot of the time I spend thinking, which is weird, I shouldn't spend my energy on this right now, but I'm always like, okay, well, how do I engineer the perfect environment to raise a child in? You know?
I think that's, in my opinion, like one of the flaws that we're seeing is like, what is the perfect environment to raise a child in? And
Yes.
you're just like, the more you learn about life, the more you realize like it's just this mess of so many options that there really isn't, like when you're looking for outcomes, like should I put them in sports, like all that, like you don't know, you know? But when you go back to like, what are the basic needs of a human being? It's like one, love. You know, like if you can't provide your child with a space of love, like it's just one of the most necessary parts of human interaction, you know? And so it's like, I'm asking myself those questions, not so much of like, what are the things, but like, what's the spaces that I want to raise a child in? And am I capable in this space of my life to show up and give that to a child? And if the answer is yes, then I'm totally cool going into that space. But I know, like, I look back at a lot of like my personal development and like a ton of love and credit to my parents for this. Like, never really felt a space in my life where I didn't feel like I was loved. Wow. I got in a ton of shit. I did a lot of stupid things.
Yes.
I got punished for doing stupid things. But I never was made to feel like I was a bad human and I was wrong.
Yeah.
And I realized that like a lot of the desires that I have to fight for that in the world come from this space of like screwing up as a kid and being like, what you did was wrong, but we still love you.
Yeah.
You know, and when you give humans that space where they're allowed to bump up against the rails, but they know that like what's inside them is not going to be shamed for it, you get somebody that's actually willing to show up, and you get somebody that's willing to be honest, and you get somebody that's willing to push boundaries in a healthy way. And for me, that's one of the craziest things that I see, like in entrepreneurship, in the way we create companies, in most of the way we hold up interactions with people nowadays, is like, we love you, we love you, we love you, and then you screw up, and we exile you. And we don't really have any processes to either let somebody apologize or forgive somebody. And you're seeing this a ton with like famous people who screwed up 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And in no way justifying what they did 20 years ago, but the person they are today is so far away from that person.
It's not even the same person.
Yet we still exile them and say that they're just a bad person and you're no longer allowed to engage in society.
Right.
And I think in order to have a healthy world, like you have to have a way for that person to actually apologize and come back and become the person we want.
Right.
Otherwise, all we're doing is creating a world where we have shame for people and we're saying, we'll love you when we love you, but if you screw up, you're gone, which is basically a world of control and fear.
Totally.
And that breeds a whole bunch of other problems, you know?
Yeah. No, totally. It's like humans are all kids. Like we're all just grown.
We're just a bunch of large children.
We're just large children, and so just connecting that back to what your earlier comments around, we need connection and we need growth. So to set the foundation as a parent, I guess, just set the foundation for that as for your children. Just set the foundation for connection, love, and growth, like learning, essentially, right? And then wherever it goes to, it goes to. I mean, I guess I was asking the questions that are 3 steps down the line where, okay, yeah, I get, like, or maybe I didn't get that, but I was just jumping to the, okay, what's tangible parenting? Do I put them in sports? Do I not put them in sports? Do I put them in an advanced class? Do I make them take chess? All this different shit, right? Where it's just like, well, no, just set the foundation for connection and growth. And that's the same thing that we fucking require as 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds. And that really ties back in my mind to the whole concept of like, that's just an abnormally large child walking around, and life has shaped that person into what they are today. And then that gives you a whole bunch more compassion into, oh my God, yeah, that gives you a whole much more compassion to that person. Then that kind of opens up a way to, like a way to re-enter maybe a bad person into society and take that bad off of them, right? Having that empathy. That's really interesting. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, it was fun.
Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Surrey, BC.
Sweet.
Grew up on a pretty large property. Had a huge ravine. Basically spent all the days running around, building forts, building bridges,
Badass.
tree houses. Whistle would get called at 6 o'clock. We'd run in for dinner.
You had a whistle.
Oh, Dad did. You could hear him from blocks.
Nice.
And yeah, it was cool. Like, I don't think I realized what it was, you know? And like, we didn't grow up well off, but we grew up, what I now realize, very well off in the spaces that matter for like human development.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting thing that we're doing now, is like we're equating money for things that actually matter to humans. And that was one thing that my mom and dad always did, is they fostered like creativity. They fostered my sense of what I thought I should do. And they did a really good role acting as teachers and facilitators without ever being tyrants, you know, in the sense of, it was like I played provincial level soccer.
Yeah.
And it got to a point that it was like 6-7 days a week, you know, and it was destroying my social life.
Yeah.
I was 13 at the time, and there was a ton of opportunity in soccer. And I remember wanting to quit, and it wasn't, you can't quit. It wasn't, you have to keep going. It was, why do you want to quit? And it was the facilitation of trying to figure out, like, am I running from the hard work, or do I just not find value in this anymore? And we got to the end of that equation. I was just like, I just don't really care about playing soccer anymore. Yeah. And like, I look back at that decision to this day, and I'm like, no, I don't, like, there was no part of me that thinks that was like a teenage boy running from something that I actually cared about. It was genuinely the right decision. And that pattern has evolved a few times throughout growing up. And I attribute a lot of that to my parents, where like they never projected their own desires onto me.
Right.
At the same time, they didn't just like, yeah, go do whatever you want. You know, it wasn't a free for all. It wasn't about not doing things. But I now realize, like, I've had a couple companies that I've either built or tried to build, and you just realize that, like, until you're aligned with something you care about, I don't believe you can find the energy to make it worthwhile. Yeah. You know, and that's what I've become really fascinated, like going back to like spending some time in Bali, is like, what are those things for me? Where they're the ways I either look through the world. They're aligned with me more on like a subconscious level than just on like a logical thinking level. And I think we all owe it to ourselves to find those spaces to do that. You know, because if you don't find that spaces, you end up just becoming a product of like the high level ideas that other people have thrown onto you. And you go through school, you end up becoming whatever you end up becoming, you get into this career. And if you never had conscious thought along that process, you end up 30, invested in what you're doing, potentially straddled by student debt, or at the very least, like life investment and emotional debt. And then it's really hard to be like, cool, I'm going to throw all this away. You know, and I think for those that know what they want to do early on in life, go all in. But I think we have a narrative in society where we're so afraid to say, I don't know what I'm doing. that we jump into anything early on, and then we have to reinforce that, and we have to reinforce that, and we have to continue to hold the wall up. On the inside, we're like, yeah, I actually don't care about this anymore. And then you hear the heroic stories of somebody that like dismantles their, in a lot of cases, like say corporate job, and goes and does something that makes less money and they're happier.
Yes.
You know, and I've seen a lot of that, but I think we can eliminate a lot of that by giving people permission early on in their life to explore, to screw up, to play around, to try things out, to follow curiosities, and spend your first 5, 6, 7, 10 years trying to figure all this shit out.
Right.
And then whenever you figure it out, cool, go
Right.
in. Because now you can emotionally go into something.
Right.
You know, and you're like, I'm going to double down on this because I actually have emotional conviction that I care about it.
Okay. So I hear what you're saying. Now I want to flip that on you because I want to understand you a little bit. Again, you've built something that's epic, and what other people look at is like, holy shit, that's so cool, you know. And you're still at a spot where you're like, hey, I'm just gonna go. Like, I'll see you guys in 30 days, in 45 days, whatever it may be, right? So I don't want to project this onto you, but tell me if I'm on the right track. It's like you're clearly someone that consumes a ton of information. You're very aware of what inputs you have in your life, what information you're taking in, and what the source of that information is. And you've absorbed it on a fairly high rate. Like, you seem to be someone that can retain information that you're interested in. And if you're interested in it, you can retain a shit ton of information. And it seems to me as if you're at a spot where you've retained a shit ton of information, but again, that's high level processing and high level thought that people have projected onto you. So maybe you're at a point where you're like, okay, I have all that, but let me take all of that knowledge, bundle it up, go sit in Bali for 30 days and actually figure out what I think about all that high level information, and then how to apply it to my life. I think.
No, man, that's very, very cute of it. Like that's it, you know, like,
okay.
I think we live in a world that is overwhelming with information. I've definitely consumed, I would say, too much of it. You know,
really?
like, yeah, there was a year that I read 70 books.
Yeah, I read your writing of that. Yes.
And that was cool because, like, it was funny. It got to the point that I'm like, let's try and read as many books as I can in a year. Just, you know, like, just,
yeah.
I'm 75% of the way into this thing. Let's do it. Let's double down. Let's play with it. But it was cool because on the outside, I'm like, oh, I read 70 books in a year. That's flashy. And I'm like, but I tell you, I probably implemented 1%.
That's fucking it.
Of half the books I read.
Yes.
And even that's probably, you know, like, I would be better off reading and studying 3 books and putting that work into my life than I would be reading 70 books and not doing the work.
Okay, yeah, but I have this like fear. I'm like I'm literally at that spot you were probably a couple years ago where I'm like, yeah, books, information, podcast, constantly just give it to me. I want it because I have this fear of like, I hate not knowing what I don't know.
Yeah.
I hate that shit. And like, if I know there's a couple things that I don't know, okay, I can handle that and I'll tackle that at this point.
Life's
whatever.
long and there's a lot you're not going to know, man. Like, that will eat you alive.
And it does. And it is eating me alive right now, right? And so I'm just like, so what advice would you give to someone that is in maybe my position where, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people that listen to this podcast are high-level thinkers that are literally like trying to get as much information as possible. And I'm just at this flood of like, again, books, podcasts, mentors, everything, every information I can. And I'm just like, and I understand if there's that Audible commercial or whatever that was like, CEOs read 60 books in a year or whatever. And I'm like, or like high intellectual people do this. And I'm like, yeah, but how much of that are they fucking retaining, as you just kind of alluded to? Like, is it really important to how many books I'm reading or how much I'm implementing? But I can't get myself away from this fear of like, you know, but I want to, like, even if I don't implement it, or like, I just want to have had a time to touch that I want to touch every piece of information and say, yeah, I know that, you know, and I can't get away from that fucking fear rather than implementing it.
Yeah.
You know? Wow.
Well, I think one of the things, like, I realized, like, when CEOs read 60 books a year, and I'm like,
No.
One, who is CEOs? You know, like you start with like the marketing side of it. I'm like, who is that? Because like, I can find you a CEO of a company that's underwater that reads 60 books a year.
Yes.
And I can probably find you a CEO of $1 billion company that doesn't pick up a book. You know?
Single
like,
book, yeah.
But the other part of that is like, taken in the context they probably want to intend it, of like, the CEO may have this ability to envision, where his role in his life is to envision everything as much as possible.
Yes.
And then create a world that gets executed. So all of a sudden, the books that he's reading is still getting implemented.
Right.
You know, the truth is, you can have all the information in your head, but if you're not actually using it, it doesn't mean shit.
Doesn't mean shit.
You know, and I think that, so for me, what switched is going back to like the 80-year-old version of myself.
Yes.
I would be pissed to be 80, to know all these things, to have done none of it.
Ooh.
You know, like
Ooh.
Mel Robbins has a whole bunch of stuff around snooze, and I can tell you it, but I guaranteed if you looked at my life, I would not be honest to say I did it all the time, you know? And I'm like, but if I fix that one thing, I'm better off than reading her book 100 times over, you know? And all of a sudden the fear from knowing and not implementing outweighed the fear of not knowing. And so it's interesting. So now what I try and do is read a book a month, maybe 2.
Okay.
I'll listen to podcasts just to play.
Yes.
But at all times, I will buy a physical book and I'll study it.
Yes.
Right. So so when I say read a book, honestly, I listen to books because
Yes.
I can consume
More
audiobooks significantly faster.
Right.
You know,
okay,
like the ride out here was 30 minutes, you
Mhm.
know, twice speed on a book is 2 hours, or is an hour of the book.
Ah, beautiful.
That alone is a book a week.
Yeah.
But at all times, it's like, how do I have a book that I'm actually going through and reading and studying and implementing, where I'm actually taking a look and saying, well, that section right there is good.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like in my life?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the really cool thing about like where we're at in the information age. All the information has been brought out there. Guys like Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Tom Bilyeu, like these guys, their sole career right now is to take all the information, refine it down, and give it to somebody in a digestible fashion. If you're really committed to the actual growth side of it and not the feel good of reading book side of it, you don't even care to read the books unless they help you implement more.
Right.
Because what you actually want is to implement it. And these guys have done such a good job of curating the world that you can just go and be like, okay, what are the things that have bubbled to the surface?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to cherry pick those, you know?
Okay, so I'll play devil's advocate in that. Is like, I think we're probably the same in that we take pride in doing the work.
Yep.
Right. And so I get that, and I love listening to the Tim Ferrisses and the Joe Rogans and shit. But I kind of feel like I'm cheating. So like if I hear about someone talk about Malcolm Gladwell, okay, that's cool, but I'm not going to even try to spew that information or say that I know it until I've actually read his full book. Now, I may have actually gotten the same amount of value from listening to the Coles Notes or someone's, recap of that versus actually, taking the days it took to read that book. But I'm just this hard-headed motherfucker that's just like, no, I'm going to read the book.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a waste of time, right?
Well, so like that's the gray area, because like all Malcolm Gladwell has done when he writes that book is condense an even larger amount of information that if you really want to be honest, you got to go back and read all that information.
All the fucking scientific journals or whatever it may be, right?
And he has taken all that information to weave a narrative that grabs your brain and says, ooh, that's correct. But he's still presenting his side of an argument. And so that's where like all of it is a spectrum.
It's an endless loophole that just keeps going and going and going.
And that's where like for me the implementation side of it matters, because I'm like, I don't actually need to understand all that. I need to understand what works for me,
right,
with my biases and my nuances and what I want for my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I know how to get that reliably is to throw it into my life and play with it.
Totally.
Like I can tell you right now that 4:30 in the morning is really hard for me, but it's the happiest time I have.
Yeah.
And the only way I would have been able to tell you that is to do it for long enough time to be able to tell you that.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much we learn about ourselves in our willingness to experiment with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're constantly consuming and not experimenting, but you're consuming because you want to grow, like that's actually your intention, then you're actually missing the point.
Fuck.
Now that said, if you just want to read books, read books and enjoy the hell out of them,
Yeah.
But if reading books becomes that like torturous space, because you're like, I remember like a point when I was reading books that like I literally physically felt addicted to reading books.
Yeah.
Like I'd walk away and he'd be like, headphones in, book on.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm doing nothing with this.
Yeah.
It's coming in, it's going out, and I'm not even sitting around long enough to understand what they're saying.
Yeah. Because you want to get on to the next
Because I want to get on to the next. And that for me was like a metaphor of like a type A driven life. Where I'm like,
life,
on to the next,
bro.
and I'm like, I missed the point. You know, and like that scares the shit out of me to become 80 and not get a second chance and be like, I built a company that I was never present for because it was on to the next.
Fuck.
I went on cool experiences that I was never present for because I was on to the next. I was in relationships that I wasn't present for because I was always thinking about what's next. And I think that narrative is pervasive in our society. And for me, like at the point I'm at, I'm just like, that doesn't add up to a good life.
Yeah, I'm almost kind of scared right now. Yeah. But yeah, I'm on board. What do you obviously value your time? Try to, right? I mean, it's the most valuable asset we have in life, right? From an investing standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, from most standpoints in life. How do you dictate what your information inputs are? How do you craft, okay, I'm going to listen to this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be here? How do you try to find a mix that works for you?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Like, one, I don't get too worried about it. You know, like I'll listen to a podcast and if I get 15 minutes in and I'm like, out, it's out, you know, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of the times, like we want that, like I'm no longer chasing having everything in this like fit box. I'm like, life is chaos and I'm going to play.
Right.
You know, and I'm going to read books that suck. I'm going to read books that blow my mind. I'm going to pull in things that don't add anything to my life. And I'm going to pull in things that totally add a ton to my life. And so, like, I try and look at, like quality and credibility matters.
Yes.
You know? Just not trying to pull in stuff that is garbage. Curiosity is another really big one for me. So, am I naturally curious about it? I think there's a lot of things that, like for me, like the whole hormonal system of the human body, I had no idea I cared about that.
Yeah.
You know, there was no part of 27-year-old me that'd be like, you're going to fall in love with understanding that.
Yeah.
Me, fascinated by it now.
Yeah.
You know, and that was just reading actually one book at a time to try and understand the way guys think and the way girls think from a psychological perspective.
Yes.
That got me onto hormones. And I'm like, whoa, these things actually dictate so much of my life.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what they are.
Yeah.
And so curiosity matters a lot. I don't necessarily try and stay up to date with anything. Just up to date's too fast, you know? Like by the time you finish a book, it's basically old knowledge.
Right. That's why university doesn't work.
Pull threads, you know? Like that's what I'm always trying to do is like I'll start on one and if I'll just keep going. And if books reference other books, I'll listen. If podcasts reference other books or other information sources, I'll try and put those together. And then I just use Evernote and I just have this like forever long note.
Yes.
Of like all the stuff.
Really?
Yeah. And it's just, there's just
Spewing.
notes and notes and notes. And half the time I can't find anything, but for me, it's more the process of putting it down.
Yeah. Totally.
And that's what things like for me, like these periods of life where you go back and you like, actually organize it. You're like, okay, cool. Like I have all this stuff here. I probably have 1,500 to 2,000 notes just in notes on my phone. And it's never like a conscious process to try and get them. It's just, I'll write them down as I go.
Yeah.
And so I just follow that. And for me, I try not to take it too seriously in the sense that sometimes I'll pick up stuff that I'm like, this might be garbage.
Yeah.
But who knows? Like, you know, like some of the books that I thought were initially the ones I'd like the least, I love the most.
Yeah.
You know, and so I always leave a little bit of room in that space to mess around. And it's interesting because I think younger version of me cared more about what other people would think about something.
Yes.
You know, I'm like, this is a hot topic, so let's read about it. And I realized that one, there's more hot topics than I can consume as a human.
Yes.
And two, my job in life is to figure out my role. It's not to follow trends or anything like that. And it's to figure out what my role is and then how that plays back to the world. And that's where the curiosity thing really doubled down, is like, my job is just to figure out all the things I'm curious about.
Okay, so what are tangibly those information sources for you?
So audio is a huge one for me, just because of the way I learn.
Sure.
So I use an app called Autumn.
Yes.
AUDM, which takes long form blog posts from credible blogs and turns it into audio, which is awesome, because like there's some phenomenally good
Ooh, that's good.
blogs out there that I don't want to sit and read a blog for 45 minutes in the morning.
Yeah.
But I will listen to it
Yes.
as I walk to work.
Yes.
So Autumn's good. Audible's really,
Right.
I love it. Audiobooks. If there's a book that I deem super good, I'll always buy the physical copy and take notes of it.
Right.
Because there is, in my opinion, a ton of value in the physical reading of something.
Right. So if you listen to the book and you're like, oh, that's fucking amazing, I'm going to buy it and then read it.
Yeah, like I've read books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is the history of the world from one person's perspective. And none of that I need to understand the nuances of, but the overarching theme of it and the credible details that build it up, I'm like, interesting.
Yes.
But one and done, it's gone.
Right.
Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which is about human communication and negotiating, which is it's one of the books I recommend to anybody who wants to have better communication with another person.
Okay.
That's a book that I've listened to probably 5 times.
Wow.
Read 3 times, taken notes on it, and bought the summary of.
What the fuck? Can you give me the Coles notes?
So Chris Voss is one of the top terrorism negotiators for the FBI. And so his whole thing was like, how do you negotiate with another person?
Yes.
And not from like the business school case of like, let's get to a space of common agreements. His is, what are like the emotional things that are going on when he's talking with a terrorist, and the terrorist has 4 U.S. citizens and wants 10 million. You can't be like, okay, cool, I'll give you 2.5 million and you give me 3 of the people back. Right. And so, and it's cool because he addresses the manipulation side of what he talks about, but his job is to get to that space to actually understand what that person wants.
Right.
And it's the book that's taught me the most about holding space and listening and actually asking probing questions in a way that allows somebody to drop their walls and open up. And so use manipulatively, dangerous.
Yes.
Use genuinely to allow somebody to drop their walls and open up and communicate what they're feeling, especially in a high stress, intense environment. For me, is the most powerful tool.
Well, I'm gonna definitely have to read that book.
Yeah, it's the book I recommend probably the most.
Wow,
actually,
that's crazy, because that's essentially my job right here, right now.
Yeah.
It's essentially like, okay, let's get past, and I say it to guests before they even come on. Like, I just want to get past the fucking 3 layers of ego that you have, you know, and if it takes me getting vulnerable, no problem. Like, whatever the tools are, but I just don't have a lot of tools in my toolkit to get down past those 3 levels of ego or bullshit or defenses or brand that you're trying to put up, right? That's so powerful. And it's not even in a hostile environment. Like, this is super chill, you know? That's so powerful. And then honestly, like on a client side, like client in whatever facet of life that I operate in is like, okay, how do I address your needs and give you value for that? And then we'll go from there. And that even goes back to like Gary Vee, jab, jab, hook, you know, like it's just like give value, give value, give value, you know, and take, you know, down the line, you know, like anyways. Okay, sorry, that's so fucking tangent. So that's amazing. That's an amazing book. We'll take note, 100%. Bree, please take note of that. Actually, Bree, can you even throw that up there? I kind of want to see it. What other information sources are you, like actual tangible places like guys can go listen to or read or watch or whatever it is? Like what are you really plugged into right now?
Yeah, so like the one that I think everyone should tap into is like themselves, at the edge of their bed for 10 to 15 minutes in the morning. You know, like but I think that's the crazy thing is like we're so externalized. We're constantly seeking externally rather than sitting there and being like, wait. What do I want? Yeah. What do I know? What do I need?
Yeah.
You know, like, and not what do I know globally for everybody, like what works for me? Mm-hmm. You know, so like I try and spend a lot of time being like, what are the moments that light me up? What are the moments that engage me? What are the conversations I want to have? what are the moments that bore the shit out of me?
Yes.
You know, like those will tell me more about what I want from my life than any book I've ever read, ever.
Fuck yeah.
You know, so
Even
I think
this one.
Yeah, that book is awesome.
Chris Voss. Okay, yeah. Jeez, $36. Come on now. No, it's all good.
4.8.
Look at the other
900
ones.
reviews.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Those other books down there are pretty good too. Laws of Human Nature, Atomic Habits, Can't Hurt Me. Shout out David Goggins, Totally Psycho. All those books are good. Yeah, okay, super noted, and on Audible too. Nice way to pick up on that, Bree. Do noted. Where's the title come from?
So, in his line of work, it's not like a lot of the times, like he's not talking about like, oh, we'll meet in the middle. His whole thing is, how do I get 100% of what I want, and
Right.
you get nothing, right? Which, when you look at terrorist negotiations, that's what it is. Is like, he's like, how do I walk away with this guy giving me all 4 of the hostages?
Yeah.
I give them no money, and they go their way.
Yeah.
You know, because that's
what you want.
the only good outcome from his position.
Right.
And so that's more of like a jab at that whole space. And
Okay.
it's more of a jab at the old way of negotiating,
Right.
in the sense of like getting to yes, where it's
Yeah.
like, I want you to agree. Like his whole thing is like, he wants you to say no. Because if you say no, you have power. You know, and once you have power, you feel like you're in control.
Yes.
Once you feel like you're in control, we can play together. You know, but if I'm just like trying to say things to get you to say yes, because then I think you're going to say yes to the thing that I want,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's a very human approach to it. And it,
Right.
for me, aligns with a lot of what I understand and what I've seen on how to actually communicate.
Totally. Yeah, because you can't get 2.5 humans.
No.
Doesn't work like that. You get, so I'll take Christy and Ben and then give me the legs of George.
Yeah.
Doesn't work like that, right? Power of saying no. Yeah, that's super powerful.
Which is interesting. Like when you think about the way we negotiate in business, where it's like, you'll get 60% of what you want, I'll get 60% of what I want, and then we'll just kind of split the difference. You know, like our relationships with other people, like what if your relationship with your partner was like, we're going to be 60% happy on all of our conversations, you know? And so a lot of what his book is about like getting to those underlying fundamentals, because then you actually know what the other person wants.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it's not what they're initially asking for. And from there, you can actually, if you're using it in proper ways, start to build connections that are truly giving the person what they want and need.
Right. Wow. Yeah, no, I actually knew that from a sales tactic. Like you'd say, well, hey, would it be so much for us to sit down at such and such time? And they'll say, well, no, that wouldn't be too much to ask. You know, and you're like, oh yeah, they just said no. You know, but in turn, they had the power to then go from there, and then they feel like they're moving the pieces on the chessboard, right? Mm-hmm. But I never even thought of it from that perspective of splitting the difference in a negotiation tactic. Linguistics are so fucking interesting. Do you speak another language?
No, I don't.
I'm really surprised you don't.
I used to speak French.
I'm super surprised you don't.
And I just lost it, and it's on that
list.
I got to do it again.
Yeah.
I used to be fluent in French. And then, but it was interesting because I learned French after developmental phase. And so they actually are now figuring out that you store languages in a different part of your brain if you learn them earlier on in life.
Oh.
Yeah, so it actually changes where it is in your brain and how quickly your brain accesses it.
Wow.
So it has different implications of how you use that language and how like secondary and tertiary languages are stored if you've learned them generally, I think, after 4 or 5 years old. So
wow, that early. Fuck. Damn. Okay, cool. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, super, because I love the train of thought or the concept around you're limited to your language, right? Like that's barriers. There's a quote about that I can't think about right now. Something about language and being limited to thinking in that language, right? Because there's words in other languages that we just simply don't have, so we can't think in that language, so we can't grasp those concepts. Yeah, which I think is amazing, and especially it's so interesting from being a Westerner and a foreigner. Or not a foreigner, rather just a Westerner, and a very typical one at that, to just constantly think within the English language. And then the English language is compromised of Latin and Spanish and French and Greek and all these different things. And it's just an amalgamation of those things rather than like I spent some time in Denmark, so this is top of mind, rather than Danish. You know, like for instance, there's concepts that I just couldn't understand. Like for instance, there's a word called hygge, Hygge, which is essentially like it means cozy. Direct translation is cozy. Like we don't have a word for it in English, but it means having familiarity in a common, warm, comfortable space with your friends and family in order to connect. So it's also like a word for connection. It's also a word for togetherness. It's also a word for comfortable. And it's just like I can't even, like if I didn't know that word and now I can put a label on that word so I can put it in my mind so I can think about it, I would have never even thought about that. And that got me to think about like how I'm missing that in my life. So like language limited me to my train of thought. Like I'm so like monolithic in that thought because I only speak one language. Like fuck, gotta get on that. Gotta read some Spanish books. I love Spanish. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really cool space, like how much the external, like what we're told and taught shapes our whole view of life, you know? So for example, like our language is a very exclusive language where it's like us and them,
yes,
they, as opposed to other languages are a lot more communicative and relational, where
Right.
it's like they'll talk about something in relation to what it is to me, which means we're inherently connected. Or when you think about the senses, you know, like if you ask most school children how many senses you have, they're like touch, sight, smell, feeling, hearing.
Yeah.
And you sit there and then they start to think that their senses are just limited to that. And then you're like, but what about your sense of understanding, your sense of intuition, your sense of connection, your sense of, and so they've actually done studies with Aboriginal tribes and tribes in Africa where they'll list 200, 300, 400 different senses that they use. And so it's just really interesting where it's like we actually start to narrow our scope of what we're capable of based on what we're taught and what we are told or what we accept to be the reality. And that is both like, it's a double-edged sword. It's really good in some places, but it's also super limiting in others.
How's it really good? Because you get people to focus?
Well, so the hard part about like, you can use it in a way that is either confusing or downright putting things out there that are not true.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
And that's, so something like your sense of intuition, really good in some cases, totally flawed in others.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And we know that humans generally have strong intuition about relationships with other humans intuitively in ways they logically can't get to.
Yes.
But we're really bad at predicting outcomes intuitively.
Yes.
You know, so you can give somebody that the power that their sense of intuition has, but without the context of how to use it properly, we might not have the actual tools to implement it, which can get us into hot water.
Yes, could definitely get us into hot water. I want to double back here because I was about to go into something else, but people you're actually tuned into, you listed a book. What other like information sources are you really paying attention to? But whether that's podcasts, whether that's books, whether that's like a YouTube series, whether that's movies, whether that's, I don't know, whether that's people.
Yeah, it's honestly not a lot. Like,
Really?
No, there's just so much out there, you know, like I really like the work of obviously Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Tom
Yes.
Bilyeu. I think those guys are doing phenomenally good jobs elevating people who are in really cool spaces.
Yeah.
And from the curiosities that I pull from there, I'll almost always read a book about them.
Yeah, Matthew Walker or something.
Yeah,
like that,
you can you get into so much more in somebody's condensed narrative
Yes.
than you ever will in a podcast or in any other medium. But I also don't, like, I think we're at the point that so much of the knowledge that's out there is regurgitated.
Right.
You know, like going back to there's 108 billion people and we're the last 8 billion is like, we've actually pulled so much of the knowledge out.
Yes.
And so recently I've been finding myself going back more to things like Buddhism, to Stoicism, to things that have stood the test of time and just trying to figure out like, okay, what did they figure out in a world that was much simpler and a lot more focused on the human that we might be disregarding today, or that we don't know how to implement it because it's messier. And so I'll just read a lot more in those spaces, whether it's traditional texts or whether it's translations of it, meditations by Marcus Aurelius, those types of things, and just always with the goal of how do I understand that within the context of my life so that I can make my life easier and actually put that into practice.
It's so crazy. If you go to my phone right now and you went to the tabs, you'd see Marcus Aurelius, which is just weird that you're bringing that up. What is it about Stoicism and Buddhism that you find important and that attracts you to those two things?
Yeah, so I spent actually a lot of time thinking about that, or especially around Stoicism.
So sorry, for those that don't know, like Stoic is a really weird word. How would you describe Stoicism?
Yeah, in like for me personally,
just give context around what it is.
Yeah, for me, it's somewhat in line with Buddhism in like the non-attachment from the emotion of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that is the biggest area that I'm trying to play in with both of these. I think there's so much power in the world to dive into like the emotional responses that we're giving ourselves liberty to dive into. But I also think that the understanding of those emotional responses is just as important, if not more important, than having the permission to dive into the emotion. And that goes back to like the multiple stories where I want to be able to understand what I'm internally feeling about a situation, but I also don't want to lose control of what's happening.
Yes.
Right. And that's where understanding a lot of the practices of Buddhism and a lot of the practices of Stoicism start to bubble up.
Right.
Where they are different tools that allow me to look at an emotion I'm feeling from different angles and to detach myself from that emotion so that I can play with it to try and figure out what to do with it.
Right.
And what it actually means. And is it a true emotion that I want to be holding on to? Is it emotion that's attached to past trauma that I haven't dealt with? Is it emotion that's not even mine that I saw somewhere else that I'm holding on to?
Right.
So that I can actually show back up in the world concretely with an understanding of how I feel about something and what I want to do with it.
Fuck, dude. Yeah, Jesus. You go back to this concept constantly of like, hey, I got it. I've consumed it. Let's go play with it. You know, like you're getting a screwdriver and you're like, all right, I'm gonna go find something to fix with this. You know, like that's
definitely electrocuted myself a few times in my early childhood.
For sure, man. So with that being said, what ideologies do you subscribe to? In just generally, I mean, in the most general sense, like what way of thinking, you know, do you think you fit into? Because I can't pinpoint one.
Yeah, it's a big question I'm asking myself.
Right.
I've definitely, so I grew up Catholic, and it was interesting because I saw how powerful different frameworks for life were. So
okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. So you say you grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
Do you mean you grew up wholeheartedly believing that, or that is what was around you?
Yeah, I would say it's more like, especially looking back in hindsight, what was around me.
Okay, sorry.
It was never in like a strictly Catholic home. I did go to private elementary school.
Okay.
Switched over to public and for high school.
Okay.
And it was interesting because like I saw how valuable like a framework for life was. You know, like here's how we look at life. Here's what we believe. Here's what works, what doesn't work. Here's our no-go zones. Here's our this is what we're going to do zones. But I also saw how certain concepts can be hijacked by people to control.
Yes.
And so it was interesting because I switched from private school to public school, and when I moved over there, like I no longer had to subscribe to anything that I was so used to in elementary school, even down to like, what am I going to wear today? It was
right.
like, whatever I want to wear.
Yeah.
You know, and
totally.
like, how am I going to act? And it's kind of like, well, however
I want to act.
And it made me realize that like freedom on the extreme is not actually what I'm craving, in the sense that freedom, true freedom, is actually coupled with a ton of responsibility, and that my job is to figure out that framework for me. You know, so like when somebody punches me, how do I react? Do I just punch them back? Do I fight? Do I protect myself? Like, what is that space?
Yes.
Or when somebody offends me, what ends up happening? And so I think that's really where like my curiosity for life started. Was I realized that when I moved out of private school and into public school, that like this framework that I was so used to was gone.
Right.
And that I could either float around with whatever I wanted, or I could systematically start to build my own.
Through discipline, essentially.
I would say more through curiosity.
Through curiosity.
Through my own, like, what works, what doesn't work, you know? How do I want to hold my relationships? How do I not? Do I want to value my intuitive brain? Do I want to value my logical brain? And just this constant playing with all these different ways. Which I think, like, the end result is that you get to a place where you are quite certain in who you are and what matters to you, almost to the point that you're totally willing to constantly question it.
So you started out with this religious framework. Essentially, you got very comfortable with it to a point where you started to ask questions around that. Now, from that point, I mean, you're still an infant, you're still a child, you're still growing in this hero's journey. Now, how did that? I'm very interested in how you got to where you are today. So that's maybe the start of it, but I want to see how your thought went. So maybe those that are listening can attach to one part of that story or another and say, oh shit, you know, maybe this is the next step in my thought. And you know, for Julian, he's at a spot where, you know, I think is really cool. You know, you're a role model to many. And so maybe we can help get a little hook they can just grab onto based off hearing your story and how your ideologies change throughout time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think like that's one of the big things that in high school I had different friend groups in high school.
Okay.
You know, like I wasn't part of one group of friends. I had the kids that were part of my class that I was good friends with. I switched schools for a little bit, so I had my friends at the other school, and then the big thing I was into was snowboarding.
Right.
So I had my snowboard friends that I didn't go to school with at all.
Right.
And it was cool because like that gave me the liberty to like play and explore different people, all while still feeling accepted by whoever I was being to that group. Mm-hmm. And I think like when you peel the layer back, like all of us just want to be loved and accepted. Like I think that is one of the most fundamental human things.
Right.
And then we build a whole bunch of stuff around it, so that we get those feelings from people. So it's like, how do we actually find the people that love and accept us for who we truly are?
Yes.
Or who we want to be in that, like, on like a concrete foundational level. And so I think I had like the ability to move around socially early on. I had a disposition that would, like, for me, I'd rather be honest with myself and not liked than dishonest and liked. And I haven't done enough work to figure out who that is, but
yes.
I think a lot of it comes back to like a childhood of being loved, where it's just that feeling, like even on an emotional gut level, is more valuable. And then a lot of freedom from my parents to like screw up and make mistakes. And like, I'll never forget, like I was in engineering when I was 19, going to school. And I was probably about 8 months in and I hated it.
Yeah.
You know, and we'd spent the money, it looked good on the outside, and I just remember coming into the kitchen one day, home from school, and like when you're in engineering, like you're full tilt.
Yeah.
And I sat down, and my mom was like, "How was your day?" And I was like, "I want to quit."
Yeah.
And I had all the like excuses in my head on why, and had every reason like to rebuttal her when she said no.
You had a map, you had a game plan.
And she was just like, "Okay, cool. What do you want to do?"
And you were like, what?
And it was just that moment that I'm like, and she's just, to paraphrase what she said, it was essentially, you got a lot of life ahead of you, and I can't tell you what the decision is.
Oh.
She's like, that's something that comes from inside you, and I trust that you know yourself enough to figure that out.
Shout out to moms, man.
Oh, like that.
Damn.
But like I think back to like every decision I've made from that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was it. And so I ended up switching over to business and then switching and switching and switching.
Yeah.
And I've realized that like because of that space that was created,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem changing my identity until it's one that I'm certain about.
Damn. And that just goes right back to today where you're like, I don't know if I'm cool with this archetype.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm cool with all this.
No. And I think like you get to this point that when you're okay switching, you actually want to test, like stress test it.
Right.
Because you're like, I'm not afraid if the answer is no.
Right.
But if you stress test it and the answer is yes, stay here, you're like, fuck yeah, I'm doubling down. You know, this is exactly where I want to be. And you have a conviction most people can't get to about who you are and what you're doing with your life. And I think in that space is where magic happens.
So in summary, you don't have an ideology. You just take information in, you go play with it, you figure out what's true to you, and you go from there.
Yeah. And it's adapting. Like I think humans are way more connected than we want to logically understand. And when you look at the world and when you look at most other species, we see it. But for some reason, we've put humans in this like separate category where like we no longer even consider ourselves nature. You know, like us versus nature. And you're like, we are nature.
Yeah.
We came from it. We evolved from it. It is us. We like,
Yeah.
And I think humans are at this really interesting spot evolutionarily. But bringing it back to like what's true for us on like a human biological level.
Right.
And so there's some truths that definitely pop up for me in that space. But it also changes as I get older and I understand what life is and I understand what life is to me and the craziness of the world, and you see more of it and you experience more of it. And as I drop my walls and as I'm willing to sit in spaces of vulnerability and deeper, I can go into the space and like 20-year-old me would have never said this, but 30-year-old me gets that like love between humans is like one of the most powerful core emotions.
Yeah. Totally.
And not love as in like relational, romanticized, Hollywood can make a ton of money off it love, like just humans connected.
Yeah.
You know, in that space that you feel when you're 3 a.m. and you're having a heart to heart and you care, you know, like that space. Like I sit here now and I'm like, I get that.
Yeah.
You know, but that took a lot of work of like dismantling a lot of bullshit I had to even get to a space where I could feel that. You know, and so when I'm 40, it's probably going to be deeper or different or
something that's not what it is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or more evolved.
Or whatever it may be. Yeah. And you're not even like trying to get there. You're just going forward in some fucking way, which is really cool. Yeah. I mean, listen, man, back home, you used to just hear like, it's all love. At the end of the day, it's all love. The universe is all love. Connections all love. Materials all love. And you're like, what the fuck is that?
What do you mean, man?
Yeah,
like, yeah, that sounds cute, but
yeah, like tangibly, like no, like I know these are fibers and I know these are molecules. Like, what does that mean? You know, but it comes down to what's important and you know, one love. You know, like that's such a loaded thing. You know, it's really funny. So I'm sitting here looking at my notes and I'm like, shit. What do I want to cut to the core to? And there was this quote that or something you wrote that said, spend the time, do the work, cut back everything that's not you, and then you're only left with the fibers of your being. And I didn't understand that. And it's funny, I was looking at that, I was like, oh fuck, I get that now, you know, just based off this conversation, which is a very fucking powerful thing. But on that same, there's a train of thought that I'd like to explore a little bit there, which is, okay, how do you cut back all the bullshit that's not moving the needle then? You know, with that kind of quote in mind, what like tangibly, how are you like, okay, no, that's shit, that's fat, let me cut that off, that's fat, let me cut that off. What's that process look like? How the hell do you even go about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because like that for me has shifted a lot in the last 3 years because the needle shifted.
Yeah.
Right? Like
there you go.
And that's been the big one. Like for me, 5 years ago, I'd put my outward success above my inner peace.
Okay.
You know, so the needle was what is going to make the most amount of outward success.
Yes.
And it sure as hell wasn't relationships. It sure as hell wasn't connection. You know, I thought that was my justification. It was like a ton of work. And it wasn't even like work on like who I am. It's like looking at what else is working in the world and doing it. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, like I can have success. And I'm like, but if I'm a mess inside, there's no amount of success outwards that's going to heal the hole in my heart.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll have that and I'll turn around inside and I'll just be a mess. And you see that all the time, you know, like we're constantly chasing these things that when we get to, don't actually fulfill us the way we think we're going to be fulfilled. And I remember that, like I had my first company when I was 19 and it was a bartending school. It was the time of my life, but I'll never ever forget that before I had it, I was like, if I can just get the financing and get the school, life is going to be so good.
Yes.
You know, and like a month and a half goes by and somehow I pull it all together and end up buying the school. And for like 3 weeks, time of my life, like you're running around, you're like, I'm 19 years old, I have this company, life is super good. And then that feeling went away. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Like the second I can get this thing profitable and cash flowing and I'll be 19 and this thing's going to be so good. So I worked my ass off for 6-8 months and started to make some money with it, felt super good. And then the feeling started to go away.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, if I can just sell this thing and move on to something bigger, you know, and I was just like, I looked back and I was like, whoa, that's the same pattern.
Yes.
Because every single time I'm chasing a feeling, thinking that success is going to solve that feeling.
Yes.
And that feeling, what I found out is like, I want to do something that matters. I want to do something that tangibly makes a difference for people.
Right.
You know, and that if I'm not actually true to what that feeling is, then I can chase all the external stuff. And all it is this dopamine high that disappears. And so as I've gotten older and like started to understand that, the needle for me has shifted from like outward stuff to inward stuff.
Right.
And if I end up building big things out of it, that's awesome. If I don't, that's cool because I'm still in that space that's true to me.
Okay, so I personally have a lot of curiosity around that. So you say, yes, I'm chasing success. I'm chasing that feeling, that dopamine high, right? Of, okay, if I can get a cash flow or if I can build it to this point or whatever your accomplishment is in your mind, right? And you're chasing that feeling. Okay, so for me, it's the reverse. For me, it's I'm running from the fear of failure constantly. So if in the perspective that you just put it in terms of getting that dopamine high, you can understand how you can kind of like short circuit that thought and then go a different direction. But then what's the code, so to speak, of, or, you know, the way of thinking about things where you can short circuit the holy fuck, I'm just so afraid of failing, that it's pushing me to this idea of success. Like I don't even necessarily want the conceptual or the physical or the tangible or the material of success. I just don't want failure. You know, like I don't know how to short circuit that thought. Can't get past it. It's hard.
What does it say about you when you fail?
What does it say about when I fail? Well, failing is fun. Fuck.
It can't be fun because you're afraid of it.
Right. But it is.
No,
but it's
you've been
terrifying.
told to tell yourself it's fun.
Cut the mic, son. Yeah. Then why do you keep going? So like, I think so how I got to that spot was, you know, childhood has taught me a fear of failure, right? And then sports has taught me to attract failure. That's why I did this podcast, right? Because I thought I was gonna be really bad at it, right? And I was like, okay, let's go fuck that up for a while, and then we'll get good at it. And I do that in sports. Like that's why I love like I've been in basketball my whole life. Like basketball is the sport I go towards naturally the least. Like I was super good at rugby, super good at football, and super good at tennis, and I hated all those things. Like I wanted to go towards basketball because I wasn't good at it, right? And so I think there's sports I've kind of like learned two different ideologies, and maybe I'm not completely over that first childhood part to fully understand it. I'm working on it. I'm getting there. Give me some time. Anyways, so get it. I'm really latching onto that process and trying to implement that onto my own life. I find it really fucking valuable, and hopefully some other people do too. And you just kind of attack the same issue from two different sides, which is really fucking powerful, and thoughtfully disagree with me, which is even more powerful, which is why the fuck I wanted you here and why this podcast is so damn long. I don't give a shit. Anyways, I want to go back to yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, before you do, I think that's the cool thing is like you can hold the two truths in your head. You know, like right. I know that fear And failure is good.
Right.
You know, like I know I'm going to grow. And so I crave that. But on like a deep emotional level, I also know that when I fail, I feel like less of a human.
Right.
I think they're going to judge me. I feel like I'll be less accepted. So on one hand, I know this is the right thing to do. But on the other hand, the truth is, I don't want to be put out on a limb saying I'm not good enough. You know, and I think that's where, like, when you go back to like the human connection, like the stronger our social circles are, the more willing we're able to put ourselves out there, because there's no person in a strong social circle that's going to tell you that you're not enough when you fail, right? That little child inside you is not sitting there being afraid, right? And that's what I equated back to like a lot of the stuff that happened like in my childhood. I'm like, every time I failed, my parents loved me.
Right.
That taught me that when I put myself out there, like, yeah, I can still screw up and it still sucks, but I'm not going to be abandoned. And that all of a sudden gives you this liberty to sit there and be like, cool, I'll go build this company. And if this company goes bankrupt, or if it fails and it doesn't work, my worst case scenario is that I move back home with the woman that has loved me more than anybody on
in
this
the
planet.
whole world.
You know what I'm saying? And you sit there and you're like, that doesn't sound so bad.
It's not bad.
You know, and that ties back into like the stories. Like that's the narrative that I tell myself. The other narrative is that I screwed up this company, I suck, I'm not good enough. You know, and both of them are true.
Yeah.
But I choose to pay more into one.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the power and the control that we owe to ourselves to figure out how to get. And you kind of get to this point that you realize that all of it doesn't really actually mean as much as we weigh into.
Dude, you know, that's really funny. So you go back to this place of loving and caring in your community, in your tribe, right? I've been built through life in a different way where I think if I fail, my backup plan is always like, yeah, but I'm me. So I'm going to plow through it no matter what. Like, even if I'm dead broke, in jail, homeless, whatever it is, like, I'm still going to bet on me. So it's interesting how those two psyches have developed almost in parallel. Same core concept, but different in their nature. Very fucking interesting.
And it's cool. Like on that, I think that's one of the things I've honestly struggled with this as I've gotten older and I've understood it more, because I've lost some of my ambition in the sense that I realized that it probably doesn't matter as much as my 20-year-old self told me.
Right.
You know, like I used to tell myself that if I could build a company, people would love me.
Yes.
And now I'm like, no, people love me. I don't need the company to be accepted.
Yeah.
And then so all of a sudden you're like, well, then what the hell am I doing?
Why am I building the company?
And that was a struggle of a transition to be like, okay, I'm building the company because I see something that matters in the world, you know, and yes. I've had to unbuild my emotional drivers. And part of going to Bali is to like rebuild the emotional drivers that I know actually matter in a new way. Okay. In a way that's a lot healthier, in a way that allows me to let go of control, in a way that allows me to open up and teach people rather than have to be the person that understands and is in the front of the charge and is leading. Like my leadership now is I want to be the dude at the back.
Yeah.
I'll be the guy at the front if nobody wants to be there, but I would rather create the space for somebody else to be put up front because I'm not chasing that. I don't need to be at the front to be accepted.
Yeah.
And I've started to realize that there's actually way more power in letting go and being the person at the back than there ever can be at needing to be at the front.
Yes.
Because you need to be seen and liked.
Fuck. Yeah. How much of what you've just said in the past however long has come from your experiences with Chasing Sunrise?
I would say majority of it.
Wow.
I think of business for me as like one of the most powerful personal growth spaces.
Yes.
You know, like you go into business and you go into entrepreneurship, one, to build something cool you see in the world, but two, to grow.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you miss that growth part, you're missing like one of the most powerful spots of building anything. And that doesn't have to be a company. It can be a podcast. It can be art. It can be music. It can be putting anything inside you out into the world.
Right.
I don't want to narrow that just to business.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's really interesting in that space where it's like CS for me was the first time that I started to move quite publicly with a lot of these things. Like a lot of my companies before were like small little worlds.
Yes.
I wasn't exposed to a large group of people. I wasn't exposed to the diversity of humanity. I didn't understand it both in the beauty of it and in the struggles of it. And so for me, it's just been this space to like turbocharge my own personal growth, but also to question so much about what I thought mattered. You know, like when I came into CS, my scope of what life was narrow. I'm like, everybody wants to go have a ton of fun, push their boundaries, do ridiculous stuff, and maximize 100% of their day. They want to be loud, they want to be on buses, they want to be with other people. And now looking at the world, I'm like, oh wait, no, that's my view of the world. And that there's people that their ideal Sunday is like a chill space with 3 other people doing something really mellow.
Right.
And I would say like younger version of me didn't understand that and didn't have the security in my own identity to be like, oh, that's really cool. Like, tell me more. Like, why do you want to do that? Let me try it sometime. Because I was so fixated on my own identity and the value my own identity gave me that I didn't start to realize how crazy diverse the world is. And so by going through that with CS and seeing thousands of people and interacting with them, you start to realize that like humans are this crazy diverse thing in like the way we show up. But then there's these like really simple big pillars that underlie all of us of like, we all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted. We all want to connect with other people. We all want to have cool experiences. What connection, love, experiences look like on the surface is this crazy diverse thing.
Yeah.
But the fundamental level of it is all the same.
Okay, then how do you build? So that's amazing and fucking stoical in its own sense, right? That's very philosophical. Now let's take that back and say on a tangible level when you're building a business, that doesn't really work, dude. Like the first structure that you had or methodology around it was like, hey, this is awesome. This is what people want. They want to go be on buses. They want to be together. They want to explore. They want to push their boundaries, all this stuff. Like they want community. They want purpose. That's what you want. That's what you realized. But that first part works really well as a business because then you can come out and put that messaging on people and gravitate people towards your business. Now that second methodology that you just kind of came to of like, okay, yeah, we want these underlying things, but I don't know, I don't know what subgenre or what part of that purpose or that growth or that connection you want, and I'm just throwing it on you. So then how do you really even market that now? How do you market CS now knowing that people are very, very diverse?
Yeah, and that's been like the crux of like this whole last 3 years. It's been this unintentional experiment that's brought us deeper and deeper and deeper in trying to understand this, and the deeper we went, the more we learned.
Yeah.
Like I remember early on when we would throw emails out to people and you'd have a lot of people, you'd have hundreds of people show up, but we'd have thousands of people not show up.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's interesting. Because the thousands of people that didn't show up said they wanted to be here. So where are they? And some of them had legitimate reasons why they couldn't. But then it started to creep into well, I know you invited me, but am I allowed to be here? Am I going to fit in? Do I belong? And so we started to like, as the company grew, go into these deeper and deeper layers of humanity.
Yes.
And I think out of that was a very conscious decision not to build a company first, but to understand. Because you can build a company on top of it and create a space that just does the surface level stuff. And it would be successful. There's a couple verticals that we can go into that as a business we know will be successful.
Successful as in making money?
Yeah, successful, sustainable, making money, still doing a high level of what we want to do.
Right.
For me personally, I'm a lot more interested in like, how do you solve this issue down here? Like, how do we have so much potential in humanity, but the inability on a large scale to assemble it and organize it and pull it out and get people to engage? And not just in any one thing, but like even in their own life. Like, why do humans struggle so much to show up to their own lives? And questions like that. And that's where even my process of like identity, going from like I'm building a company to like I'm trying to build something that, wait, I don't necessarily care so much about the business. I care about this space over here,
Right.
but the business needs to happen.
Right.
Okay, so like what roles do I have to take?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I got to step back and let go of control on the business. Cool. You know, and it's easy for me to say that. It's a whole different vertical for me to actually give up that control. But for me, I'm personally really curious of like how you solve the human potential problem, how you solve the human purpose problem, right? Especially in a world where AI might start to take away some jobs, maybe not all jobs, but you start to have more and more people who have less relevance in the current economic landscape and more time and no idea what they want to do. You know, like that's the freedom problem, where it's like freedom is both the most powerful thing and hell if you're never taught how to use it.
Fuck, yes.
Right? So how do you build a structure in society that starts to help people figure out what that is so they can contribute back to the world?
Yeah.
And I believe we're going to have this really powerful like reshuffling of people in a really narrow time period as technology continues to advance at the speed it is, where if we can get it right and if we can re-educate people in a way that's conducive to both what they're good at, what they want, and what the world needs, you can actually put people in a place where they want to be and where they're actually engaged, which is the opposite of the 75 to 85% disengagement rates in the current employment workforce, not to mention life. So yeah, that space I realized, and that's the curiosity thing, is like, I'm just really fascinated with that problem now. And so it's, okay, how do you build a company around that ultimately helps somebody figure out what's a good life for them?
Yeah.
Right.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you're actually, rather than creating solutions that create revenue streams, you're solving problems. And then whatever the problems are solved, like, yeah, maybe they'll make money, but like we're solving fundamental problems. And then I think that's how really fucking tangible businesses grow. Like that's how Lulu grew. That's how I think companies like RYU are growing, you know, if they still go their current trajectory, I don't know. You know, just like that's how Apple grew. You know, these very, very iconic and successful brands have gone to the why and then figured out the business later.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I sit there and I'm like, from a pure business perspective, if I can figure out how to find even a small group of people and say, here's a space and a framework that you go through in whatever way and you end up in a better place in life, there's money to be made.
Yeah.
You know, like people will pay to enhance themselves.
Yes.
You know, and so for me, personally, it's really how do you figure out the best way to do that in that person's best interest in a way where they still become a valuable contributing member to society.
You are solving the human potential problem.
And so that question for me is worth 3, 5, 10 years.
Wow.
Right? Like if I spend 10 years exploring and playing with this and even get 10% of the way, I'm like, that's cool.
Right.
Because at that point I can do a lot with it.
Finding something that's worth 10 years of your life.
20 years, 100 years.
Fuck.
My entire life.
Shit.
And I personally see no problem greater than that reflected back on me.
Right.
Right. When you look at like what we're trying to do with CS in some levels, and you look at what I'm talked about in here and like I'm trying to do with myself, I'm like, what adds up to like good for me?
Yeah.
You know, and this is just in
what makes me fulfilled.
Yeah, a weird way, a direct reflection. And it's why I've really doubled down on I have no idea.
Yes.
Because every time somebody comes to me and they're like, you should do this, I'm like, you have no idea about the context of my life.
Fuck you.
Right? And from there, like, and I see it, like I have other people that are like, they'll say the exact same thing, but they're like, hey, have you thought about this?
Right.
2 totally different things. One of them I take on, one of them I build a wall against.
Yes.
You know, and so how do we change the current climate of our consumption world of rather than me convincing you to buy something because you have to, me say, hey, do you need this? If you want it, it's here.
Yes.
You know, and I think maybe we'll go that way from a market standpoint. Maybe we don't, I'm not sure, but I know for me, I want to see more of that in the world rather than psychologically convincing people that they need our stuff when we don't.
Yeah. Fuck, that's so interesting. Okay, from a tangible standpoint, how do you finance this shit? Like, dude, like, you've created a dream. Like a dream in terms of a dream company, and dreams in terms of like a dream lifestyle. You've created freedom, you've created time, you've created space to learn and fall and fail and grow. These are all things like, dude, how do I get that? You know? So like, how did you actually tangibly make this work? How do you make this go?
Yeah, that was probably in some ways the hardest part.
Right.
I wouldn't say the hardest, it's the most stressful in the sense of, on one hand, you're holding something that you deeply believe in. On the other hand, you're like, I have no idea how to make this sustainable. Mm-hmm. And I equate monetary value to sustainability and growth.
Right.
Where it's like, if you can't bring the money in, you can't pay people to spread it, grow it, build it. And so for the first year, it was like just scrappy.
Yeah.
But we almost didn't spend any money. You know,
Right.
like I think that was a really interesting thing where most of what we were doing and putting on was time cost.
Right.
You know, like it cost some money for the website, some ton of our time invested in, which we were happy to put in. And as the community grew, then you could start to throw out this trip over here that would make money, this product over here that made money. And we now have a pretty good idea of what those areas are that will end up becoming their own self-sustainable parts of the company that feed the bigger thing. But one of the big things for me is like, how do you not wall up the community? Right? Because like you could sit there and be like, cool, we're going to throw these events that are open and free, but you got to pay $25 a month to have access to anything. And if you don't pay that, you can't get in. You know, and then all of a sudden you have certain people that come in, but you actually lose all of your growth. You lose people coming and dabbling. You lose people playing around with and trying things out. And you're essentially, in my opinion, walling up the thing that humans need most.
Okay.
You know, and you're putting it behind a paywall.
Right.
And that's something that for us, we've never wanted to do, where it's like the community side of CS should remain open.
Right.
Right. And that just is a crux emotional feeling in the sense of like, I want to be able to be like, hey, you should come out to this thing.
Yeah.
And maybe not all of them are free, but not have money is the only way to get in.
Right.
And that begs the question of like, okay, how do you finance it? Right. And that's been building other business units such as trips and travel, different products, and then programs that we run that all in their own right sustain the company.
What are your products?
So like you can get into apparel,
Right.
Sustainable products that we believe in and stand behind.
What are some of those?
Big one, like, and so we haven't developed the product area very much right now.
Right. That's why. Yeah.
But just on like sustainable, like even making access to things like sustainable mugs easier, better, more branded, things that just we believe and want to see more of in the world.
Fuck yeah.
Apparel is another big one, but apparel done right, not
Right.
just another apparel company, because I can go and get a company that's going to give me a shirt for 30 cents that I can slap a logo on. But how do you work with somebody who has actually built apparel that's done with recycled pop bottles and organic cotton, and then we can do a job telling the story of why that matters.
Fuck, that's cool. Yeah.
And I think that is what we're starting to see. Like you're seeing brands like Patagonia not just sell the features of the gear,
Yeah.
but the story of how the gear came to its existence.
Yes.
And that's a narrative that's becoming so much more powerful, and rightfully so, because how we build something has a direct impact on the environment and space that we live in.
Yes.
And if we don't connect the two, all of a sudden we're going to have all the nice gear in an environment that we don't like.
Just kind of where we're going, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could go on ethical investment for a bit. But that's a whole nother podcast. And frankly, like, let's go there another time, because I really want to go there with you and maybe another expert. they can break, like, I think you're great at breaking things down conceptually, philosophically, and then we need like a numbers counterpart or something like that that would be like super awesome and educational for me, because that's my realm, right?
Well, I just break it down like really simply.
Please.
Without getting into it, is like invest in more of what you want to see in the world.
Yes.
And invest in less of what you don't want to see.
Yes.
You know, and it really is that simple, where if you don't want more carbon in the environment, spend less money on carbon producing companies. If you want more sustainable apparel or like a nicer environment, spend more money in the companies that create that world.
Yes, totally.
And the nuances of that start to get muddled,
Yes.
but like the ethos and the thesis of that is really simple.
Yeah.
And then how do we make it really simple for people to know where their money's going?
Right.
And I think that's the really cool thing that we're seeing with social media, and with information moving around, is it's not that hard to know if a company is doing it right.
Totally. I totally agree. I undoubtedly, indubitably, like unparalleledly agree. So, on that, you've built a company that finds revenue pillars to sustain itself while not putting up a paywall for consumers to essentially say no. You're trying to break down spots where people can say no, and you alluded to that with your email list earlier and whatnot. And it all goes back to, again, a fulfilled life, which I think that you mirror really well, and people will gravitate towards, and probably is why you're successful, right? There's two things that I have to ask, and the first thing is that you spoke earlier, I believe it was, I just want to touch on it and get your thoughts on it, you said 29 things that make a fulfilled life. You said, I've actually really thought about it and broke it down to X many things. What were those things, and how many were there actually? Was it 29?
I got a list of like 27 to 29.
That's what it was.
And it's not an exhaustive list.
No, of course not.
You
But
know,
I just wanted to.
it's the stuff off the top of my head, like, there is like just taking the self, you know?
Yes.
There is your growth factor, you know, like, am I growing? Am I not growing?
Yes.
Do I have autonomy? Am I free to choose? Do I have control over my decisions? There's the identity factor, right? Do I know who I am? Do I not know my identity? What depth is there?
Yes.
And then you flip it over on the other side and you're like, relationships and connection. And so there's all these different areas of somebody's life that you can play with, that as you play inside one of them moves the needle of quality life up or down.
Yeah.
But it's really about taking a look at all of them and then taking a step back and being like, that's my current iteration of my life, or that's where I want to go.
Yes.
And you can go as granular as you want, or you can stay high level, you know?
Yeah.
For me, I like to play a lot more in the space of intuition about a lot of them, of like, do my relationships feel good?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, I'm generally fulfilled by that question. But then always ask the other question of like, what would this relationship feel like?
Yes.
Does that on a gut instance work?
Yeah.
If yes, pursue it more. If no, ask why not and maybe drop it.
Totally.
And realize that like life is not this perfect thing that you're going to have 5 out of 5 in all these columns, but just this fluid moving thing that you try and hold on to as much of it as you can and then let go of the rest, because the chaos of it is half the fun.
It's a process. It's a playground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay. How does someone jump in?
To themselves or to...
into the ecosystem you've created?
Yeah, Chasing Sunrise. If you just go on Google and Google Chasing Sunrise, it will be the first thing that pops up. And then if you just sign up on there, you get on the mailing list. Either hit us up on Instagram or Facebook. 2 very easy places to get a hold of us. And
yes.
We'll drop some events from there.
Cool. So what does that process actually look like? Like, for instance, like, I've been signed up with you guys for a year. I haven't come out to shit, you know, like, what the fuck's with that? You know? So what's the next process of that? Like, how do I get on these trips? How do I buy these products? How do I get plugged into the community, etc.? Yeah.
And that's something we're actually in a bit of a phase with, going from like when we ran 100 events in a year one time.
Wow.
And it was literally my roommate and I every weekend pouring our like souls out to make this thing happen. And it was awesome. Yeah. It built a phenomenally engaged space and community that we wanted to see more of, but emotionally and energetically slayed us.
Yeah.
And that was where we're like, okay, cool. Like, we know this thing works. let's take a step back. Let's build the system that actually allows other people to step into our place and build, and puts the onus back onto a community to create. Not because we don't want to create, but because why should we be the only ones able to create? Right? And that's really what we're interested in now, is like, how do you build the systems that enable other people to jump in and play?
Yeah.
And so that's something you'll see roll out in the next kind of 3 to 6 months as we finish it up, is like systems that allow other people to create events and spaces and experiences that still align with what we're doing, but maybe have their own flair. That starts to bring the diversity in.
Give themselves permission to do it.
Yeah. And the tools.
And the tools.
And drop the barriers.
Damn, you guys are onto something. That's really cool. I can't wait to see this thing grow, man. Like, it's just fun. Like, from a fan standpoint, like, just watching the business maneuver and navigate these waters and these times and just everything, and seeing now, knowing you and knowing the people that are involved in your ecosystem a little bit, like, damn, this is interesting. Like, this is the best reality TV show I could ever watch. You know, this is
reality's a trip in 2019, man.
Super trip. With all of that, you know, we dove into so much over the past however long. Is there anything more that you'd like to add to this in terms of thoughts, or you know, just to complete it and make it a 360 and make you happy with it?
Yeah, the only thing for me always goes back to, like, for some reason, like, just get people to give themselves permission to explore who they are.
Yes.
You know, and if they can't give it to themselves, then here it is. You know, like, you are allowed to ask yourself questions, and you are allowed to believe in the answers that come up.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I fundamentally believe humans are good. And that when we all get to a space where we're true to ourselves and aligned with ourselves, the world is going to be an absolutely beautiful place with a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And so I just challenge every single person anywhere, any single person listening, to, like, for a week, carve out 5 minutes a day and just ask yourself a couple questions around, like, what do you want from life? What do you know is true? What are you hiding from the world? What are you lying to yourself about? And what is it going to cost you in 80 years if you don't answer those questions?
That last one's so powerful, man.
That's the one that makes it real.
Yes.
So
makes it fucking tangible. I can feel it. I can taste it. It's on my tongue right now. It's disgusting.
And it's the truth.
Hell yeah, man. Listen, where can people find you?
Yeah, if you just pop on Instagram and slide into DeSchutes.
Yes.
I'm there. I'm pretty active on it. I'm always throwing up stories. Love engagement. That's, like, the big thing, like real engagement, you know, not like Instagram engagement, like real humans talking. I think the fact that we have these platforms is the craziest thing. I think we're underutilizing them for what we can use them for. Like, you have the ability to connect with everybody in the world now.
Yes.
And that is the most beautiful thing. So yeah, whether it's reaching out to me, go find people that you love what they're doing, get in touch with them, meet up with them either digitally or in real life. Yes. And actually use these things to connect with other human beings.
Yeah, there you are right there.
It's fucking amazing that we live in a time where you can do that.
Yeah. You know, I didn't even get into, like, dude, how was fucking Everest? How was sub-Saharan fucking Africa? How was the Yukon? Like, these are questions that I have, you know, but you know what? I'm cool with not asking them, because I actually just need to go and experience it myself, and I'll find the answer that way. Yeah, so he's right there. Go find him, go connect, go ask, go read those posts, actually, because tell you what, yeah, those are really all epic, dope, edited photos, but, like, the captions are fire, my man. Like, God, I'm taking some notes over here. Everyone, there's value at every step of your social game, and so that's pretty cool.
I actually laughed at some point. I'm like, I gotta go get photos just to post what I think.
Yeah, no, literally, it's too funny. Anyways, old soul, young mind, I love it. Thank you for your time. Let's get you back, and dude, I just can't wait to see this fucking journey.
My pleasure, man. It was an awesome conversation.
Appreciate you, bro. Until next time, that's a wrap.